Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Tuesday. Days are starting to run together. Had to think about what day it was. We have a really, really fun show coming your guys' way. Now, this is almost like a follow-up.
That I think matters a lot, Trev. That's why we're doing it today.
I do too. This does matter. We are doing a ranking show that matters, and it's a follow-up on the way too early top 25 rankings that we did all the way back at the end of January. And now that we've gotten to see and evaluate a lot of teams coming out of the spring, there are some adjustments to our rankings. We're going to continue to do this as the offseason goes along. I'm sure we'll do a pre-fall camp one, and then obviously the official preseason before the week 0, week 1 kickoff games. We'll probably do another one. I always love doing these kind of shows. It's a lot of fun, man.
That one will depend on if there's anything significant that happens during fall camp. So like there's some crazy quarterback battle, there's a major injury, kind of like, honestly, like today's rankings for, there's some changes to the rankings, but there was no like major changes in the top 10 until yesterday's news. Like with Brendan Sorsby. So like when things like that happen, then obviously that's going to shake things up a little bit. And that actually caused Trevor to resend his top 25 because he had sent that to me like a half an hour before that news broke. So, but we'll definitely do a preseason one that we'll probably do before fall camp. But the other one will depend on kind of how fall camp goes. And hopefully for Notre Dame, it's very uneventful and there's nothing that shakes up the rankings. But man, I love doing these, Trev, and I love this time of year because there's a lot of questions that not only we have answered about Notre Dame and some questions that remain, but that's true for everybody in college football. And some of these teams that we're going to talk about today, like what's this based on? Okay, so a couple things that this is based on. Obviously, there's been some things that have happened, some transfers that have come in, some guys that have been hurt, some quarterback battles that have been won or lost, some areas that we kind of scour what people write about their teams. We look at the people that cover the teams. What are the things they're saying coming out of fall camp? Trevor and I have watched a bunch of different spring games. That's part of the conversation. It doesn't necessarily sway it heavily in one direction or the other. And then just getting a sense of, okay, where are teams now? And then there's another part of it that's just we've taken a deeper dive into certain teams. Now that we're out of everything, because like with some of the teams, Trev, we did that right after a bunch of portal decisions were made, and now we've been able to kind of spend more time on rosters, spend more time on depth charts. And this is also a projection for where we think teams should be ranked in the preseason, not necessarily a prediction of where we think teams are going to finish. So schedule really has no bearing on this ranking. It's just about who are the top 25 teams based on, what they did last year, and then projecting where they should be going into the 2025-6 season. So like there's a couple teams that were like 3-9, 4-8, 5-7 that Trevor and I strongly considered, but we're like, man, we can't make that big of a jump. We need to see it first. So there is some level of what you did last year, but it's really a projection of where we think things should be and what teams have earned on day one of it. And so unlike past times where Trev and I would kind of have our own ranking, what we did this time is AP style, Trev. So he did his top 25. I did mine. I counted the points up like they do in the AP. So if you get the number 1 vote, you get 25 points. You get the number 25 ranking, you get 1 point. And then we came up with more of an Irish breakdown top 25. And so as we kind of go through it, we'll say some of the differences we had. There was only a couple teams that we both like that we didn't have the same team in, but there's definitely some teams where we had some big differences. So it's going to make for a very fun conversation. And Trev, we're going to break down our top 25. And then what I think is going to be an interesting part of the conversation is going to be who are the true title contenders this season. And I think the list is a little bit deeper than it was last year. And then, of course, we'll do a daily mailbag. And if you guys want to ask questions about our top 25 or give your thoughts, you can put MB and put like hey, here's what I think. And if you want to do that, then we'd love to hear that. If you want to ask us questions, you can ask about the teams. This is a great time to ask us what we think about a team that's, hey, I think this team is overrated because of why. And then we can address your point. Or, hey, I think this team is underrated because of why. Because, like, I know for a fact if Andrew Gilmore's watching today, he's going to have a big disagreement with us, which I love because he voices it. But then, hey, here's why. What do you guys think of this? And then we can have, like, a fun conversation about it, which is what the mailbag is going to be for. If you want to talk about Notre Dame, then maybe have something that's like Notre Dame compared to. as opposed to just asking Notre Dame questions, because we'll have plenty of time for all those type of things. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
I am too. I love doing these big picture college football shows. I love going through rankings. And before we dive into our top 25, Brian, we wanted to talk real quick about some of the teams that we elected to leave off of this list. You mentioned that there were some 3-9, 4-8 teams, some other teams in the mix there that it was difficult to leave off of this list. But based on how we evaluated things and where they're at right now, the picture became a little bit more clear. But who are some of those teams for you that it was difficult to leave off of your list?
Yeah, there were several teams that, Trev, I just wasn't sure how to get a read on. And there's a couple SEC teams that I think could end up being a lot better than they were last year. And it's just like, okay, how are they going to be? But there's one team in the Big 12 that I had a really tough time leaving out, and that's Utah. And the reason that I had a tough time leaving them off is because they were really good last year, Trev. They were an 11-2 team last year. And one of their two losses was a 1-point loss on the road to BYU. They were a very good football team. But then I look at Utah, and obviously they lost their head coach. They lost their offensive coordinator. They lost their offensive line coach. They lost, almost their two top first-round draft picks at offensive tackle. They lost a lot of talent from their defense. I mean, their defense got absolutely raided by the NFL draft and especially the transfer portal. A lot of those kids, John Henry Daly and Snowden Smith, and a lot of their best players jumped in the portal on defense. And it's really hard to know who they're going to be this year. And they were a team for me that I had a tough time leaving off, but I don't know anything about how their head coach is going to be, first-time head coach, and their defense is completely remade, and they lost 2 top 20 NFL draft picks. Some teams are built to handle that. Ohio State can lose 4 players in the top 11 of the NFL draft and be like, yeah, they're just going to reload with some other big-time player. Notre Dame can lose 2 running backs in the first round, and you're kind of like, yeah, but it's Notre Dame. Look how they've recruited. I'm confident they're going to be able to reload. I don't know that Utah has that ability to reload with all the losses that they had, especially with a brand new football coach. I probably would have still had him in the top 25 if Kyle Whittingham was still there and the OC was still there. But now that they're gone, that was a team I had a hard time keeping in. So they were out for me. I know they were out for you as well, Trev.
Yeah, they were. A couple of teams that were difficult for me to leave off of my list were 2 teams from last year that had really, really high expectations going into the year before 2025 and then ended up having disappointing seasons. And that was Penn State and Kansas State. Those are 2 teams that I'm not really sure what to do with. And especially because we're not factoring in schedule, because I've been very vocal about how Penn State could very well go 9-3, maybe even 10-2 this year. But there's also a good chance, maybe not a good chance, but there's also a chance, not willing to predict it, that they go through their entire regular season schedule and don't play a single ranked opponent. Their 2 best teams on there are USC and Michigan. Odds are they're probably going to end up being ranked at some point in the season. But outside of those, I don't know if you can confidently say that they're going to play another ranked opponent. Washington, perhaps, but there's a lot of variance there. But since we're not counting in schedule, there's so many moving pieces to this that I thought was difficult, and I left them off. And then with Kansas State, there is so much room for variance there. It's, you read a lot of stuff about, hey, Avery Johnson's back. It's like, yeah, well, he was back last year. So, that ended up being a little bit more disappointing than what we thought. I like that Colin Klein went back to Kansas State, but I have no idea how he's going to be as a head coach. So those are 2 teams that I left off. That was an interesting conversation towards the bottom half of the top 25. But yeah, man, overall, I'm excited about this list that we put together.
There's a couple other SEC teams. I thought about Auburn. I really like what they did this offseason, but again, I need to see it. I really thought about Florida, but there's still some uncertainty at quarterback, and there's still enough question marks with the new coach that I couldn't justify putting a team that had a 5-7 record in my top 25, but I thought long and hard about it. Here's a 3-9 team that I really, really spent a lot of time on whether or not I think they should be ranked, and that's South Carolina. Because I think last year's season was a fluke, Trev. I really do. Like, would it shock me? No, well, I shouldn't say a fluke. It's they were a lot better than 3-9 is more of what I'm saying. I don't think it was fluky because I think we both understand exactly why they struggled. They had a tough schedule, but they just have a very volatile coach, and they're just going to always be inconsistent. But there's a lot of games you look at last year. The Missouri game, I thought, they just played bad and still could have had a shot at. They should have beat Alabama. They should have beat Texas A&M. they played terrible against Clemson. Like they had talent to equal Clemson, but they just got outplayed and outcoached by Clemson. I think that team's going to bounce back a little bit. I think they were kind of in their feels a little bit last year. Hey, look at us. We're tough stuff. And we come out and beat Virginia Tech early. And then once they got punched in the mouth, they didn't respond very well. And I think they could bounce back. But again, I need to see it. That's a very talented football team, Trev. And if you listen to all the mock drafters, apparently they have a first-round NFL draft pick at quarterback on their roster. But they legitimately have the freakiest wide receiver in the country. They have a defensive end that's a top 10 NFL draft pick. There's a lot of talent at South Carolina. And then same thing at like Virginia Tech's another team that had a very disappointing season last year, but a great portal season, brand new coach that we think is a great fit at that level. And a team that could be dangerous. But again, it's all new. I need to see it. And then another tough one's Arizona, but I just feel like that coach hasn't shown that he can consistently reload after losing some big time players, and they lost some really good players. And I need to see it a little bit from Arizona. So those are some teams that we had left out. Trev, any others that you want to mention before we dive into our top 25?
Yeah, quick couple of mentions on my end. I thought about Navy for a little bit just because I think Brian Newberry as a head coach has proved that he can get the most out of that program, but a lot of questions still with their big three gone, with Blake Horvath, Alex Teska, and Eli Heidenreich. I'm looking forward to seeing what Braxton Woodson can do in that offense, but also there's just not a whole lot of football spring coverage with Navy, compared to other programs. So it was hard to get a read. I left them off. And then last two teams that was difficult for me to leave off were Virginia Tech and Ole Miss. Ole Miss had the biggest fall from my way too early where I had them, I think, in like 13 or 14. I had them unranked in my last one. And there's so much that I just don't know about this program. And everything that I read and dove into just didn't give me a whole lot of clarity there. Well, I thought other teams rose. So, and then with Virginia Tech, I'm on the James Franklin hype train. But at this point in the spring, I thought Ethan Gruntmeyer was going to emerge as the starter. We were going to hear a little bit more about the trenches. And so far, it's just kind of like, the culture's being established. This is a competitive team. The mindset's there. And it's like, okay, well, I can't justify then just putting you in the top 25 because I feel good about the team. You know what I mean?
I feel good about the future. I don't know about the immediate future enough to say, boy, they're going to be in the top 25. Just not there yet. So let's dive into our top 25, Trevor. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have blocks of 5, and we're just going to kind of talk about those groups as a whole. We're not going to necessarily do a team by team analysis of what we've done in the past, which can be very, it's like, okay, it's just kind of, I don't know, not as entertaining, I don't think. So we're going to talk about the groups, Trev, and here's our top 25 team, our 25 to 21. We have the Virginia Cavaliers at 25. I don't think either of us had them in the top 25 in the way too early. I didn't for sure. Tennessee's 24, Missouri's 23, Michigan's 22, and Clemson is 21. The one thing about this group, Trev, is there are 5 teams that could go one of 2 very different directions. And that was a kind of a bit of a theme for me and how I had a tougher time viewing these teams. Michigan dropped from where I had them in my previous ranking. Tennessee's about where they were. They didn't necessarily move up as much as there was just a team that I moved out from my previous top 25. But, Virginia is a team that I'm much higher on coming out of the spring. So this group was interesting, Trev, for me, because, 3 of the 5 teams in here, and I'm looking at Michigan, Clemson, and Tennessee, I don't have a great read on, in that there's a lot of things I like about those teams that could cause them to jump, but then there's some major question marks about those teams that I'm like, that's why, I think maybe we have some of them lower than other people. And a team that's really, I have I'll say this about this 5. Missouri's the one team, Trev, that I have a much higher opinion on coming out of the spring than I had going into the spring. And the emergence of Austin Simmons and some late portal pickups that they got, like Caden Lee from Ole Miss, are a big reason why I'm a little bit more what is it? Is it bullish is the one that you're happy about, right? Isn't it bullish if I like the team? Bullish on the Tigers, a lot more bullish on them than I was going into spring practice.
No, I get that completely. This is a little different than what my way too early was. I had all of these teams ranked in my way too early except for Tennessee. How I look at Tennessee is kind of how Brian is looking at Missouri. I echo a lot of things that he said about the Tigers because, I think them electing Austin Simmons to be their starting quarterback and winning the job that quickly is a good sign. I do. It's not a battle that needed to go much longer. Eli Drinkowitz was very decisive in that decision, but I'm much higher on Tennessee after the spring than I was compared to when the offseason just started. I had them unranked, excuse me, in my way too early. It's going to come down to two things with them. It's who wins the quarterback battle, and Heupel's ability to bring the locker room together. That's something that he hasn't done during his tenure in Knoxville. But now I like how they're put together in the trenches. I think this defense is going to look much more like the 2024 defense than it will the 2025 defense. That was just, giving up 30 points a game whenever they played somebody with a pulse. So it's going to come down to that quarterback battle, but I like what Tennessee has going on both offense and defense. So yeah, I'm with you. But a lot of these teams in this grouping for me, Brian, was more so like I see the upside, but out of the rest of the top 25, I have the most questions about.
Yes.
Trev,
if you and I didn't have question marks about quarterback for Tennessee, I think they'd be in my top 20.
Sure.
I really do. There's a lot I like about that football team. Well, when you look at Missouri, a lot of people say, there's a question mark about, why we have Missouri so high. They lost a lot on defense. I think their offense can now, with what we saw from Austin Simmons, and knowing that even if he gets hurt, they've got a kid like Matt Zollers that can step in year two. They have a really good offensive line and a lot of skilled players, including arguably the best running back coming back in college football next year, in Ahmed Hardy. Yes, their defensive line is a question mark because it's a lot of new guys, but I love what they did in the secondary. I think their secondary is going to be better next year than it was last year.
Yeah,
to be honest with you. And I like also what they've done at linebacker. So the back seven is good. It's the front seven that did give me some pause, but there's just enough there. There's enough athletes that they can just kind of throw at you that I think they're going to still be okay up front. That is the big question mark that I have. And then with Michigan, my big question, the firepower. Like, do they have enough firepower, and do they have enough talent? They lost a lot on their front seven the last couple of years. And I don't know that they've recruited to a level that makes me say, yeah, they're going to be great. I know they got John Henry Daly, but I just know this. When he visited Notre Dame, one of the big red flags Notre Dame has was the health of his knee. And that's a bit of a red flag for me. So I just need to see their offense be able to thrive in that way. They are a team that could go up, but they're also a team because of the question marks in the offensive line, because of, just do they really have a dynamic front? Is Bryce Underwood that guy that I could see them also falling apart this year? They were a very hard team for me to evaluate going into the season. And Clemson's a very similar way. So these are the five where I said, look, you want to tell us we're wrong on one of these five and you want to make an argument for another team? This is the group that I'm not going to argue with you much.
Agreed.
Because there is a lot of volatility in this part of the top 25 rankings. And I know Clemson's a team that a lot of people are going to disagree with, but I feel that, Trev, last year was a little fluky for them. I think Clemson's better than maybe some people think that they're going to be, but now they've got to kind of go out and prove it. I still think there's a lot of talent there. I think they're going to have one of the best receiving corps in college football this year. Their offensive line they had a big loss at left tackle last year. The tackles are a question mark, but I like there's some good talent on the inside. And even though they lost some top players, to some degree, some of those guys weren't Peter Woods did not play like the number 29 overall draft pick last year. And you still got Vic Burley coming back. Jaheim Lawson's got a lot of talent. Will Helt is getting a lot of projections as a first-round draft pick. I've seen Sammy Brown get some first-round draft pick projections. I like some of the portal pickups they had in the secondary were really solid. Elliott Washington was a really good nickel for Penn State on their team that played in the semifinals against Notre Dame. So I like that team, and I think they're going to be the overlooked team this year, and that's kind of right where Dabo wants a football team to be. It's going to come down to, can their offensive line play better, and is Chris Vizina as good as I think he was coming out of high school? Those are going to be the keys. I think their running back room is going to be much improved as well. They actually have real running backs this year, with Gideon Davidson and then getting Chris Johnson out of the portal. So they're a team that I like this season to bounce back a little bit.
Yeah, Clemson was that team for me that I could see being my biggest riser out of this group. I like a lot of what I've heard about them coming out of the spring. Sounds like Chad Morris is kind of revitalizing that offense a little bit, getting away from what Garrett Riley had them doing last year. Tate Reynolds is also coming along behind Chris Vizina. And then I echo everything that you said about Gideon Davidson as well. It sounds like he's really starting to be that guy.
to the point that I've read some reports from Clemson writers that they're going to move Chris Denson, who people thought was going to be the backup quarterback, maybe out to receiver.
Yeah.
Or maybe running back, where, because he's a really dynamic athlete, like real dynamic. But is he a quarterback? I think that's kind of the question. But you couldn't move him. The only thing behind him was a true freshman. There's some rumblings that they may try to cross-train Chris Denson, or if not flat out move him to get him on the field where he can get the ball. That's how well Tate Reynolds played this year. But I do think if Chris Vizina goes down or doesn't play up to expectations, that could hurt them a little bit.
Agreed.
In my view. So let's get to the next 5, Trev. The next group of 5 is 20-16. At number 20, the Arizona State Sun Devils. At number 19, the Washington Huskies. That was a team that you and I had a pretty decent range on, Trev. You're a lot higher than them. I'm sure we'll explain why. The USC Trojans are number 18. At number 17, the Iowa Hawkeyes. And number 16, the Houston Cougars, who I think were up for both of us from where we were in going into the spring, Trev. Slightly for you, a lot more for me. So let's talk about this group of 5, these 16-20. These are teams that I'm with the exception of Washington, I'm very confident all these teams are legit top 25 teams, although there's some discussion we could have on just exactly where we should rank them. But let's first talk about Washington, Trev, because this is one that I had barely in my top 25, and you had 19th. Actually, did I even ended up having it in my top 25?
Yeah, you had him at 24th, I believe.
24? Okay, yeah, I had him 24. You had him at 16. So let's first talk about the Huskies, because I can see where you're coming from. I want to get your explanation, and I think you also understand, having talked about them, what some of my reservations are.
Yeah, absolutely. So for Washington, what I based my list off of is I used my first initial way too early top 25 as a reference point. And in that one back in January, I had Washington as my number 19 team. I bumped them up to my 16th overall team for a couple of different reasons. One, I had some questions about their defense. And from some of the things that I've read, they're really starting to come along under Ryan Walters going into year 2. We talk a lot about coordinators going into year 2, players going into year 2. And it sounds like the players are really taken on to that level of coaching. They're a lot more comfortable in the system. But the biggest thing for me, and one of the reasons why I had Washington 19th in the initial rankings that we had, was I had a lot of concerns about the reception of DeMond Williams. With all that offseason drama about going into the portal, the timing of when he did it, and then all that other drama with the schools he was potentially going to, just to end up back at Washington, that was either going to kind of almost galvanize the locker room, or it was going to be one of those scenarios where it's just like, yeah, here's just this transfer portal merchant that couldn't go anywhere else, and now he's just back here. And a lot of my initial ranking went into, I didn't know the reception of him. Now, I'm not at Washington practices, but from everything that I've heard, the podcasts that I've listened to that cover that team, it doesn't sound like that's an overarching issue. It kind of sounds like they're just picking up with him where they left off. Now, still have some questions. That's why I don't have him much higher. That's why I don't have him cracking my top 15. When I looked at Washington, it was more of like okay, in my rankings, this is somewhat of a ceiling right now. I don't know if I see them cracking into the top 15 for, what they are as a football team currently, but that was a lot of my rationale from having Washington go from like my 19th team to my 16th team. That's what went into that decision.
Yeah, I can see it. It's all about DeMond Williams and can they protect him. That's going to be a big part of this. And I also a big part of my issue is I'm just not sold that Jedd Fisch can consistently get this team to play well on the road. And when I can't trust you away from home, this isn't about the schedule, and it's just about how good are you really if you are a completely different team when you go on the road. And that's, are you really as good as we think you are, or is your environment and the travel and all that something that just brings other teams down when they come out to play you? And so we're going to see how that one goes. A team that I'm really high on, Trevor, and that I could see being even better than we rank them is Arizona State. I really like this Arizona State team, Trev. I think they had one of the sneaky, we've said it before, I think they had one of the sneaky best portal off seasons. Getting Cutter Boley at quarterback. Do I think Cutter Boley's a stud? No, I don't. Do I think he's a good quarterback, like a good, solid quarterback that's going to play for, in my opinion, one of the best offensive minds in the game? I do. Getting Mikey Keene out of the portal from Michigan, he was at Fresno State before that, gives you a really nice backup in case there's an injury where you're not turning to, Sims again. You know what I mean? Like that, Jeff Sims again. That's just, you're just not going to be a great team when that's what you're having to rely on. They did lose something from, they lost a really good running back, two really good running backs. One they didn't use a whole lot, but losing Raleek Brown really hurts. But they replaced him with two really good football players, Trev, two really good transfers that rushed for over 1,800 combined yards last year. And you're like, how can Arizona State lose Jordan Tyson and still be a team whose receiving core you're excited about? One, Jordan Tyson was not Jordan Tyson last season. That was something we talked about in our draft show. He played 9 games and he was banged up all year. You had some young guys like Jalen Moss, Jaron Hamilton played, but getting a Morian Miller from Colorado, Reed Harris from Boston College, a guy that you all know we've talked about before. If you don't remember him, he's the tall kid that beat Leonard Moore for a touchdown last year when they played. And then Raiden Vines Bright, a kid that Notre Dame tried to recruit out of high school that went to Washington, who's also a really quality slot player. Their receiving core will be better this year than it was last year, even without Jordan Tyson. Because, again, you didn't get a 100% Jordan Tyson last year. And even if he was one dude. Now you've got 3 guys that can play. And I think that's going to be a big key. And one of the underrated aspects of their team is I actually like what they did on the offensive line. Now, but that's why I'm kind of more confident in them than maybe I should be. But that is the one thing that concerns me about why I didn't put them higher. If they can answer this question right here, their offensive line can figure it out, because their right tackle from last year, Trev, that the Steelers got in the first round, I'm super high on. I'd have taken him over 3 or 4 of the guys that got picked ahead of him. But you lose him, how's the offensive line going to shape up? And that's the thing that's right now keeping Arizona State at 20, as opposed to, if I felt better about their offensive line situation, I would have them maybe even in the next group. That's how high I am on their offensive skill. And then that's also how high I am, Trev, on the players they added through the portal in the secondary and at linebacker. The Owen Long kid they got from Colorado State is one of my favorite underrated sleeper portal pickups of this offseason. I thought Arizona State had about as good of a portal offseason as you can have for a team at that level. And I really think they were able to remake their roster. And he's a coach that's shown I can get a bunch of new players and mold them into one team and be successful. He's done that. And that's why I'm really high on Arizona State.
Yeah, Arizona State is my biggest riser out of this group, and they're consistently being overlooked. I mean, heck, even FanDuel has them as the 7th best odds to win the conference behind teams like TCU and Kansas State. We're not too far removed from Arizona State winning the whole dang thing after they were projected to finish last in the conference. So I'm with you, echo everything that you said about Arizona State. USC was a team that I had an interesting time trying to rank. I had them in my rankings that I sent over to you at 22nd. I know you were a little bit higher on them. I think they had an interesting spring. They're in an interesting spot, because I had them unranked my way too early. And then I think, Brian, in your way too early, you had them like 13th overall or something, like way back in January. But like we've seen over the course of spring, the truth ended up falling somewhere in between. I had them unranked in my way too early. You had them 13th. Here they come in kind of around that 18th mark. And after some of the things that we've seen from them in spring, I understand it. Now, I have questions around like their entire receiving core being made up around Tanuk Hines. But it sounds like Mark Bowman. Yeah. Yep, but their tight end Mark Bowman that they got in looks like he's going to make an immediate impact as a pass catcher. But the reason why they still, in my ranking, weren't much higher, I mean, they were higher compared to being unranked, but the reason why they're not much higher is everything that I read, there's still not much clarity around Gary Patterson as a defensive coordinator.
Yep.
Like a lot of what they're saying is kind of what we said about Chris Ash last year of like, hey, DeAnton Lynn kind of set the floor. It's not up to you to come in and reset the floor. It's to carry on that standard. And from all sounds of it, it sounds like USC's defense is going to be young at certain spots. They're going to be athletic across the board, but there's still a lot of questions around what that unit is going to look like schematically. So that played into a factor for me as well. But, they're taking good steps forward. More emphasis on the run game, which I appreciate.
That's going to be their key. I actually think USC's offensive line is going to be very good this season. And you and I have talked a lot about Jade Maeva, and we think he's very overrated when people start talking about him being a first-round draft pick, but he's a good college quarterback. There's 2 different conversations about him. There's the one that's like, you guys are counting him as a first-round and like top 15 NFL draft pick next year. Like, okay, I mean, I guess since Ty Simpson went in the top 15, I guess he could go, but I don't view him that way. But if you take a step back from the NFL draft conversation and just look at the college player he is, and somebody in the chat just said it, Sonny Burnett just said it, if he can cut down on the turnovers, he's a pretty good college quarterback. The problem is he's now going to be, a 5th-year senior, and he still has got issues turning the ball over. Sometimes that's just who you are. You've got a much better offensive line around him, Trev, but you're talking about Mark Bowman, who was arguably the best tight end in the country last year. He was one of those guys that was in the debate, with Caden Prothrow, Ian Premer, who's going to Notre Dame, as who's the best tight end in the country. He's very good. But you're asking him, true sophomore Tanook Hines, true freshman Trent Mosley, true freshman Caden Dixon-Wyatt, to really drive the receiving core, along with Terrell Anderson, who's a good football player that they got from NC State. I just don't know how I feel about that. Their running back room should be fine. They're going to be very good there. I think when I look at their defense, Trev, I see good football players. I don't see a lot of great football players. That's kind of why I'm not as high on the defense, combined with what you said. There's good players there. Do I see anybody that's going to oh my gosh, this guy came out of nowhere and became a first-round NFL draft pick? That I don't see. The only guy that could maybe be that is someday is Jakeem Stewart, who's only going to be a sophomore next year, but he still has a lot to learn. He was a reclassified freshman last year, so technically he should just be a freshman this year. I think his big breakout's most likely 2027. So there's a lot to like about USC. I just think their ceiling is a little lower than I thought, maybe when we initially dove into that. And then there's questions about, can Lincoln Riley really make this team, be built the way it's supposed to? And I have legitimate questions about that. Iowa, we both like. Trev's coming around on the Hawkeyes. It doesn't sound like the quarterback situation is settled yet, but from what I've read, it does sound like Hank Brown is kind of separating a little bit from Jeremy Hiklinski, but that's the one thing that I have a little bit of question mark about with this group.
Yeah, oddly enough, with Iowa, they were one spot lower in my updated rankings than they were in my way too early. Full transparency, I agree with everything that you said about Iowa. The other thing I like about them is their secondary is really starting to take shape behind Zach Lutmer and Deshaun Lee. I guess those are two dudes for them that are really starting to show out in the spring. But honestly, whenever I make a top 25, Iowa, I just know, when you have like a fast food restaurant or a restaurant that you just know is all reliable.
Sure.
That's Iowa for me whenever I do rankings. I know they're going to be exactly. They're going to be some team in that 18 to 14 range for me. And so that's how I view Iowa. But they hold true every single year. They're an 8, 9, 10 win team every single year. So that's what I mean by all reliable. It's not the lazy take necessarily of they'll be somewhere in the middle. It's just as the season progresses, that's who they prove that they are. And
their offensive line is also still going to be really good this year. Keep an eye on Trevor Laut. He's a kid that I've seen a lot of mock drafts with him in the first round. You go back and watch his film last year. He's really good. Jack Dotzer, I think, is a veteran kid stepping starting lineup. That offensive line should still be really good. I actually think their offense is going to be better this year than it was last year. How much better is going to be determined whether or not they finish 17 to 25 or if they're able to finally kind of crack that top 3 or 4 in the Big Ten and maybe be a legitimate contender. Is going to be the quarterback and how well their defensive line handles all the losses they had last year. Those are the two big questions for me. And then, of course, we've talked a lot about Houston, Trev. Trev's got me coming around a little bit on the old Cougars, but I say jokingly, but there's really someone else who has me coming around on the Cougars, and his name's Willie Fritz. That's really what it boils down to for me. Let's get into the next group of schools, Trev, and this is the final group before we jump into our top 10, and this is our 15 to 11, and it's number 15, the Louisville Cardinals, number 14, the Texas Tech Red Raiders, 13, the Alabama Crimson Tide, 12, the LSU Tigers, 11, the SMU Mustangs. One of the biggest changes in our rankings, Trevor, is obviously Texas Tech. So let's just dive into that. The NCAA has been very much on a big anti-gambling push in recent months, which I actually understand, appreciate, and I'm sympathetic to. I believe they're going to look to make a example out of Brendan Sorsby. And the optimism of him being on the team next year for me is not good. And now he's got this big cloud hanging over his head. Even if he does come back, he's going to miss the summer and all these other type of things. That's got me very much concerned about Texas Tech being able to repeat what they were last year. They're no longer the number 1 ranked team in the Big 12. We both had them in the top 10 last time. They are still going to be pretty good, as you can tell by having them 14th. They're going to have a great running back room, legit receiving core. O-line should be solid. Defense won't be as good as it was last year, but it's still going to be pretty good. But we saw what they look like when Baron Morton didn't play. And the guy that they're going to have to turn to if Sorsby can't go is the guy they turned to when Baron Morton got hurt last year. And, oh, by the way, that player, Will Hammond's coming off of a torn ACL late in the season. So their quarterback situation got real, real interesting. Based on, now this projects us thinking they're not going to have him. That's where this ranking comes from. If he gets cleared, then obviously that'll change Texas Tech's rankings a little bit. But I do worry about what him coming back could mean for the environment, because that question's not going to go away.
Yeah, the toughest part about Texas Tech and evaluating them is you obviously have all the talking heads on Twitter and all that about how, Texas Tech season is done, and you have to be able to evaluate this team for what they still have. And what they still have, whatever quarterback is walking into that situation, is walking into a winning situation. Micah Hudson, Kenny Johnson, Coy Eakin at wide receiver, Terrence Carter at tight end, Cameron Dickey comes back at running back. So it's either going to be Will Hammond or redshirt freshman Lloyd Jones who's going to be walking into an offense with really, really strong weapons. So defensively, I'm with you. Their secondary continuity is paying off in the spring. Ben Roberts and Austin Romine look to be a strong duo at linebacker. The transfer portal guys are getting on the D-line. They're not going to be what Romello Height and David Bailey were for them last year, but sounds like they're going to be coming in more in waves than just, having their premier guys. Interested to see how they do, but I'm with you. Without Brendan Sorsby, their ceiling is significantly lower, unfortunately.
A team that is a big there might not be a team in the top 15 that we're projecting on more than Louisville. I mean, this is a pure 95% projection. And why I say that is, Travis, because their offense is basically Isaac Brown, Trayshawn Hurry, and a bunch of new dudes, right? Now, what has me thinking Louisville has a shot to be really good this year is I actually think this Louisville team is going to be a lot better on defense.
Yep.
And that's going to be a big thing for me. Now, I think their offense has a chance to be much better than it was last year. You and I we were not on the Miller Moss bandwagon. And we thought that, look, I think that Jeff Brom can get something out of him. And statistically, Jeff Brom certainly got something out of him. But a big change for me is I'm not super high on, I was not very high on Alex Ellis as a defensive coordinator. And they've replaced him. I think that should help their defense. Alex English, as a coordinator, he's gone. They've got two co-coordinators. One of them was already on staff. Actually, they've both been on staff the last couple of years. So we'll see how that goes. But when I look at the talent, though, Clev Lubin is one of the best returning defensive ends that nobody talks about. He's a really good end. TJ Capers is a veteran player that's been there for a while. Stanquan Clark's a really good football player. Antonio Watts is a really good football player. One of their transfers, Benjamin Perry, used to be at Louisville. So he's kind of he's a transfer that's not your typical transfer. I think he can help them with depth. They did have to go to the portal to kind of remake their secondary, but they got good football players. One of my favorites is Keon Entringer, who they got from Iowa, who's a really good football player. Him and Xavier Nwankpa were a really good safety tandem at Iowa last year. So I'm actually really high on Louisville because of A, Jeff Brom, and B, their defense has a chance to be really good. The question is going to come down to I'm not worried about the skill talent. I think Lincoln Kineholtz is going to have some first-year starter mistakes, but he's a way better playmaker and player than what Miller Moss was. So, yes, you're going to have to live with some of the early season interceptions and mistakes that a young quarterback's going to make. That's a talented football player. He is. And you've got Isaac Brown coming back. He's healthy. Kewan Brown comes back. He's healthy. Trey Richardson was Vanderbilt's best receiver last year. And if you don't know who Trey Richardson is, go just watch the bowl game against Iowa. That's all you need to watch. And watch Iowa's talented DBs try and cover that kid because they couldn't. He's the only reason that game was close. I mean, if it wasn't for Trey Richardson, that game's a blowout. Iowa destroys Vanderbilt in that bowl game. And it's going to come down to their offensive line. It's a remade offensive line. Can it click? That's going to be the question. That's going to determine whether Louisville's a legitimate playoff contender or another year where Louisville has 2 or 3 games where you're like, how the heck did they beat that team but lose to those 2 teams? That the offensive line to me is what's going to have the biggest impact on that. No question about it. That's why they are the biggest. They could be a big riser here, and they could be a big faller here. But I'm betting on the talent this year, and I really like that defense, Trev.
Yeah, Louisville has been a fascinating team to evaluate this offseason. It's up there for me for two reasons: their defense and Lincoln Kineholds. I was not a fan of the Miller Moss acquisition.
Ooh, no.
I wasn't. And I was from jump. Brian and I were both like, this is just not. I mean, look, say a lot of what you want about Lincoln Riley. That dude can develop quarterbacks. And if he's willing to move away from you, I love Jeff Brom, but I don't think Jeff Brom's going to turn Miller Moss into a first-round draft pick if Lincoln Riley wasn't able to. Mm-hmm. He was more productive. You could argue it's because he had to be at a place like Louisville. Different conversation for a different day, but I'm with you. On top of the ends, I love what they're doing on the defensive tackle position too. They're going to be able to come at you in more waves. They were more stout against the run than what I thought they were going to be in their spring game. It's good rotation between D'Amico Kennedy, Joshua Donald, and Bailey Abercrombie. I think that's a fascinating trio to watch this season to go along with some of those good edge rushers. But Louisville's been fun to evaluate so far this season. I'm with you. They kind of fit the category of both the potential to rise the most or fall the most. I'm with you.
Another team that could be like that, Trevor, is LSU. We've talked a lot about LSU. That's a team that could end up everything goes right, and they're a playoff team. They're also a team where they could go 8-4 with like 3 one-score losses because they're just missing a little bit here and a lot of newcomers. They're a lot like Louisville. Your projection is banking on LSU's portal class gelling quickly. Everybody knows my feelings on their quarterback, Sam Leavitt, but I also have said he's going to the perfect coach for him. The question here is this, and I've talked to a couple LSU people, had a chance to talk with Preston Guy, just kind of get a sense of how their spring went. The big question for LSU is still the offensive line. If the offensive line can come together, I really like this LSU team because I think their defensive line is very underrated. Even though they lost Monsane Delore, Trev, you and I have talked about this. We really like their cornerback room. They've got to use Ty Benefield correctly from Boise State, but if they use him correctly, that's an impact run defender that they just landed. I really like this LSU defensive talent, even though they may not have the big names in the front. I think there's a lot of good football players there. And so I think this defense is going to be able to carry this team early until the offense can figure it out. The question of whether or not the offense can figure it out is going to come down to the offensive line. If they can figure that out, then I think you're going to see Harlan Berry be one of the breakout running backs in college football this year. And he's not alone. Caden Durham is there. I know there's another running back, Trev, that you like. They got a really good running back room. They have one of the best running back rooms in college football. But as we've seen before, a bad offensive line can do great damage to a great running back room. We saw that last year at Penn State. Like that offensive line struggled, and all of a sudden Keytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton can't do anything. And that's kind of my concern with LSU is, can you get the most out of those talented backs because of the offensive line? That's going to be the question there. And then Alabama's a team, Trevor, that I expected was going to be a big riser in my rankings. But what we saw this spring and everything we've read about them this spring is it's the same old with him. It's just we're going to throw it all over the field, and our offensive line's not going to be physical, and we're just going to keep doing what we do. So now you're a less talented version of what you were last year. That's not going to bode well. He's got to make some changes.
This 15 through 11 ranking is so fascinating when you look at it as a whole, because this is almost like our boomer bust category. You could argue that none of these teams, Louisville, Texas Tech, Bama, LSU, or SMU, will be where they are at the end of the year next year, because they could either be significantly higher or significantly lower. I think all of these teams fit that category. SMU is kind of inching its way out of that category, but they were even that team for me. We had a question in a mailbag a couple weeks ago that was like, out of Notre Dame's schedule, who could you see out of their top opponents not living up to it? And I was like, by kind of process of elimination, I think that could be SMU. Not willing to bet on it, but I could see it. But with Alabama, man, I mean, it's just, could I see them making the playoffs again? Sure. But it's so hard to have a discussion about this team because, here I am in the second year in a row of, they could be addition by subtraction, losing some of the people not bought in. It's, well, I said that last year. It's hey, but they're bringing in an offensive line coach that could really, I had that conversation last year when Ryan Grubbs was coming back to see what that system was going to look like. The benefit with Alabama, it's almost similar to the benefit that the Notre Dame quarterbacks are getting. is both of their young quarterbacks, Keelan Russell and Austin Mack, are throwing against a very talented secondary almost every day in practice with Bray Hubbard and Dejon Lee and Keon Sabb and Xavier Brown. So they're getting better. I think you and I are both confident in saying the quarterback play in Tuscaloosa is going to be elevated this year, no matter who wins the starting job. The biggest question after that is that going to be enough for them to be the 13th overall team in the country? Is that going to be enough to get them to a playoff push? And that's going to be fascinating to see.
And I don't know that their receiving core is going to be as good as it was last year. Jeremy Bernard is a very big loss, and they've got some talented players that are stepping into the equation there. But are they really going to be as good as what they were last year? It really is going to come down to Ryan Williams has got to figure it out. He's got to get his head on straight and figure it out. That's a big one. But look, Alabama's got a top 10 roster. The problem is that Kalen DeBoer is just stubbornly saying, I'm going to coach the way that I want to coach. And we got to try to fit the talent into the system. I retweeted something yesterday. There was an interview that Wade Phillips was doing, and I retweeted it because it's just not in particular to anything. It wasn't really Notre Dame related. It was just a coaching philosophy thing. And he was talking about how, people would talk about how this defensive lineman doesn't fit his defense because he does this. And he's like, well, no, if I've got a defensive lineman who look, the responsibility is you've got a gap. But if I've got a guy who can win in the gap by penetrating, then I'm going to let him penetrate. If I've got a bigger, stronger guy that can kind of, get off blocks and go win in the gap, then I'm going to use him to do that. He's like, coaches have to fit the system to the players and what they do well. And that's one thing I've praised Mike Denbrock about. Mike Denbrock's run like 5 different offenses in the last 10 years because he's had to adjust and adapt his offense to the talent of the team. So what he did with Riley Leonard looked a whole lot different than what he did with CJ Carr. That's good coaching. And how he ran his offense with Desmond Ridder looked a lot different than how he ran his offense with Jaden Daniels, which looked a lot different than how he ran his offense with Riley Leonard. And then you see a guy like Kalen DeBoer that's like, this is the system. And we're going to run the system no matter what our talent dictates. And that's why Alabama has underachieved in his first two seasons, Trev. There was a question that we just got from Jay Melvin that I'll kind of bring up in this segment. It says, Brian, do you think Kalen DeBoer has underachieved Alabama from where you project him to be when he took the job? And why has he blatantly refused to adapt to the physicality of the SEC and the Big Ten? I don't need him to necessarily adapt to the physicality as much as just play to your strengths. If you want to eventually be the offense you were at Washington, that's fine. Recruit that way. Go recruit a bunch of really elite pass blockers and athletic kids and elite receivers and build to that. But in the meantime, with not having those players, lean on what you do and on what you do have. And that stubbornness is why Alabama's underachieved. It's why they had no business being in the playoffs last year. It's why 3 of their 4 losses were double-digit losses. I'd be curious to go back and count up how many double-digit losses Nick Saban had in his last 10 years at Alabama. And I'd be willing to bet you it's about the same number as what Kalen DeBoer's had the last couple years, maybe less. And those double-digit losses were like to Clemson in the postseason. It was like a really good Auburn team at the end of the year. It wasn't to 5-7 Florida State, or 6-6 Oklahoma 2 years ago. It wasn't to those teams. And that's been the giant disappointment with him. But SMU's probably a team that people are going to think are like, why you guys have them high? You're just ranking them high because they play Notre Dame. No, not really. I'm ranking them this high because I think they're a really good football team. I love their offensive skill. Kevin Jennings looked like the Kevin Jennings from 2024 late last season. Jalen Cooper's a breakout star at wide receiver. I love the Yannick Smith kid they got in the portal. Ymir Knight's a good football player. You got Jalen Hill out of Alabama. Your interior offensive line should be good. I like a lot of their defensive pickups. Their defensive coordinator is now Maurice Crum Jr., if you guys all remember him from Notre Dame. The question for me is going to come down to I also like their offensive line quite a bit. P.J. Williams is a very good football player. The question is, can their remade defensive line hold up? That's if it can, then this ranking is going to be like, man, you guys were all over SMU being good. If it can't, then it's going to be, I can't believe you clowns had SMU in borderline top 10 team. I think it's really going to come down to that. It's going to, how does their defensive line hold up? That's the biggest question mark I have for SMU.
I echo the same thing that you do. All 4 of their defensive linemen will be starters from the portal. If they can come together and be a stout unit, and they don't have to be elite, They just have to be good because I love the talent on the back end of their defense. It comes down to that for me. And if Kevin Jennings can consistently week over week be the 2024 version of himself every game, not the 2025 version that ran hot or cold at times. So, but I like SMU. I really do. I echo a lot of the things that you said about him, man. So I'm with you completely.
So, Trev, let's dive into the top 10 of our post-spring top 25 rankings here at Irish Breakdown, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. And we're going to now do this one a little bit different. We're going to actually go through each team and talk about that team and what we like about them and why we have them here. And then at the end of this segment, we're going to talk about who we believe are the true title contenders. So we'll kind of lump them all together. We won't necessarily tell you as we're doing the top 10 where that cutoff exists. We'll kind of tell you afterwards. And then if you want to get some mailbag questions in that are related to our top 25, college football as a whole, asking about some of the teams in the top 25, making a comment about why you think a team should or shouldn't be in the top 25, go ahead and throw that in there. And we'll get to that when we get to our mailbag, which will come at the end of today's show. But Trev, we're going to kick things off here with the BYU Cougars, a team that you and I both had as a top 10 team who benefited from Texas Tech dropping down a little bit. They're now our number one team in the Big 12.
They are, man, and I love what BYU brings back. First and foremost, it's the guy steering the ship, and it's Kalani Sitake, somebody who elected to forego the Penn State job and stay in Provo, which I think was a huge move for him. And I think it also might say something a little bit about Penn State, different conversation for a different day. But, I mean, we're talking about a head coach.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. But
you tried to go sign a bunch of Big 12 coaches, and they all said, nah, we're good. We're going to stay in Arizona State and BYU. We're good. No thanks, Penn State.
100%, man. 100%. But, we're talking about a head coach that's been 23-4 in his last 2 seasons, played for the conference title, and also shared a piece of the pie along with Notre Dame of teams believing that they should have made the college football playoffs last year. So then you go and dive into what this team did over the spring. And I believed at the time before, when we did our way too early rankings, that they were one of the most experienced returning rosters in the Big 12. And I think some of that started to come to fruition over the course of the spring. They kept their portal losses to a minimum. You had a year 2 quarterback. I've read a lot of good things about Bear Bachmeier. Not that he's on the verge of becoming a Heisman contender, but he's taking the necessary strides that he needs to as a passer, despite losing Parker Livingston. Some of that is because of some of their portal acquisitions. Other reasons is because of younger players stepping up. Walker Lyons is becoming a go-to target for him at tight end. A little bit biased there because you guys know how much I like tight ends. But with a quarterback like Bear Bachmeier and his skill set, I could see that relationship being somewhat of what Mitchell Evans was to Riley Leonard. I see a little bit of that connection in there, especially once Mitchell Evans got a little bit healthier. Then you also have some younger guys coming along too. Legend Glasgow is a freshman wide receiver. He started taking reps with the second team as spring went along. But I fall back to the veteran leadership and the experience, especially in the trenches. I think that's starting to shine for BYU this year. We can have a conversation about, how is their top level skilled talent compared to the other teams in the top 10. And outside of LJ Martin, I have questions about that too. But when you look at the sum of all of its parts, BYU is going to be a very disciplined, very experienced football team. So I like what they got going on out there in Provo.
Trev, every ounce of me wanted to drop BYU because you just watch them play and they're just not sexy.
Sure.
They're just like, you watch them like they don't have the athletes that other teams have. They don't, they're not as entertaining as maybe some other teams. But then you watch them like, yeah, well, that's just a gritty, hard-nosed football team. When I look at BYU this year, here's a couple things about it. Here's why I'm higher on them than sometimes you go into something with okay, I'm going to drop BYU. And then you research, you do the data, you watch the film, you study the team. And sometimes it's like, you know what? This team's better than I thought it was going to be. BYU is one of those teams. And here's my reasons why. It's not even about Bear Bachmeier. I think he's a solid quarterback. I think Bear is good. They have one of the best running backs in college football coming back in LJ Martin. They also returned 4 of 5 starting offensive linemen. The guy they lost was arguably the 5th of the 5, last season.
Yeah.
They always have some next in line 23-year-old offensive lineman ready to step in. That's kind of how BYU's always been. And then I look at their defense and their defensive line had a couple good losses, but they played a lot of guys last year that could play. They lost 2 pretty good linebackers in Jack Kelly and Max Alford. Max Alford transferred out. but they were a team that played 4 or 5 linebackers every week. Like they're kind of like Notre Dame in that regard. They're not as good as Notre Dame, but like Notre Dame could not have Drake Bowen and Kingston Villiamasa for the spring, but still trot out Jaden Osbury, Jalen Sneed, and Madden Faramo and Teddy Rizak. You know what I mean? Like there's still dudes there. And that's how they're a linebacker. And the one area that BYU to me is most underrated, I don't think people appreciate how good their secondary is. This is a really good secondary. They lost Tanner Wall, who's a really good football player, but everybody else comes back. And they actually got a transfer from the SEC in Jamin Williams from Mississippi State this offseason. So it's like when you look at them and you watch them play, they don't scream top 10 team. But then when you actually look at the data and you look at how they perform, you're like, dude, this is just a good football team. This is just a really good college football team. Is 10 their ceiling? Kind of close to it. But I also think they're a team that I don't see just, wow, I didn't see that collapse coming. I don't think they're that either. The loss of Parker Kingston is a big reason why I contemplated dropping him, and that is a big concern. Who are the pass catchers going to be? You talked about, Walker Lyons transferring in. Here's a kid to keep an eye on for them. Kyler Casper, big, tall kid that transferred from Oregon, could never crack the rotation at Oregon. I liked him coming out of high school. Not as in like, oh gosh, if Notre Dame only would have gotten him, everything would have been fixed. But like for a place like BYU, he could be a really good fit. And he gives them something that they didn't really have. They don't really have like a lot of, which is I think a vertical player. A guy that can maybe catch 25 balls but average 20 yards a catch. And he complements JoJo Phillips really well. They're both real big, tall guys. And what I like about the potential receiving core next year is it's going to have some size. And I think with Bear Bachmeier's your quarterback, I think you need that. And so that's a reason why he's got to break out. That's going to be a big one. He's got to break out. But I think this, with some of the talent they have around him, I think they're going to instill him being fine. But I think that defense is going to be really, really good. So that's why we have the Cougars number 10. And then number 9, Trev, we have the Texas A&M Aggies, who are up in our ranking. And there's a lot of reasons why Texas A&M is a little up this offseason. From our post-spring is number 1, there's a little bit more clarity, at least on who's going to play where in their line play. Part of it's just some other teams aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. Part of it for me is the Mike Elko effect. I just have a lot of faith in Mike Elko. But when you really study the team and you move past my dropping them in the way too early top 25 was more about the uncertainty. You lost 4 or 5 starting offensive linemen. You lost 3 or 4 NFL draft picks on the defensive line. I think they had at least 3, right? 2 D tackles. You had Cassius Howell. I think you had at least 3 guys get picked. You lost Will Lee at cornerback. So I was focused a lot on what they lost. And then you look at, okay, what do they have coming back and what do they have coming in? Their skill positions on offense are going to be very good. Marcel Reed's a dangerous quarterback. No, he's not a future NFL quarterback, but he's going to have turnovers that make you want to pull your hair out. But he's also going to make some big plays that you're like, okay, now I get it. Their receiving core, despite losing Casey Concepcion, should be very good. They've got Ashton Bethel Roman coming back. He's the kid that made that ridiculous behind his back one-handed catch against LSU last year. Mario Craver comes back. Terry Bussey's back. You've got Aaron Gregory coming in as a big-time freshman. And then you got Isaiah Horton, who I think gives them a big-bodied presence that they didn't really have last year. And, tight end, they should still be pretty good. It's going to look different. It's different guys. Some are off to the NFL. Some of them transferred. But they should still be good there. And defensive line as well. Like, once I got past what they lost, I love the Anto Saka pickup from Northwestern. He's a really good football player. They still have DJ Hicks coming back. They still have CJ Searcy. There's one young kid that I think is going to be a really big breakout for them as a pass rusher, and that's Marco Jones, a kid that I really wanted Notre Dame to go after. I thought he was a really good football player. They got CJ Mims, who's a big kid that's been at North Carolina and East Carolina, to come in and kind of play some nose. It's going to be more of a throwing waves at you as opposed to having those high-level NFL players this year. How that group holds up is going to tell us a lot about how good they're going to be. And I think they lost some really good, smart, savvy players at linebacker, but I would argue that their talent is going to be better. Like Torian York's was a really good college football player. Just smart, savvy, but there's a reason he went undrafted. He's 5'11", 226, and not a great athlete. Noah McHale was a legit 5-star player coming out of high school. Damian Sanford's just a more dynamic player. Will those guys be able to do the little things as well as Torian York? We'll see. But I think you're going to have more playmakers there, and there's still a lot of set talent in the secondary. So Texas A&M to me is if their offensive line can hold up, they're a playoff team. If it doesn't, they'll just miss because they'll have to play a tougher schedule this year than they did last year, Trev. That doesn't impact where we rank them, but that's the thing that could keep them from living up to where we have them ranked, is if the offensive line doesn't live up to expectations. If it's just a solid line, which is honestly, Trev, all last year's line was. It wasn't the dynamic line we thought it could be. It was good. So, yeah, they lost a lot of veterans, but those veterans didn't have the jump that Miami had with their experienced offensive line last year. They were just good. And that's all they need it to be this year's good. If you do that, the skill talent takes over. So that's why I'm high on Texas A&M as being a team that's going to have a shot to get back to the playoffs.
Yeah, man, A&M's an interesting team to dive into. I mean, they have the 7th best odds on FanDuel to go and actually win the whole dang thing, not just make the playoffs. So I think that's an interesting facet to them as well. But yeah, I echo a lot of the things that you said with their offensive line. There's no question about them having skill there. It's just a question of where they start to get played. I think that conversation is driven by Mark Naboo coming back at center and Wilkin Formby, who came over from Alabama. They need those two guys to step up and take charge of the offensive line if it's going to mirror what they were last year, and that is that of a good unit. I'm with you on the receiving core. Ashton Bethel, Roman, and Mario Craver are two guys that are really starting to take shape here in the offseason. Isaiah Horton had a really strong spring game. He had like 3 catches for like 70-some-odd yards. So very interested to see what they do. Their defensive line is very, very interesting because if they're able to come along, we could start having a conversation around, hey, is Mike Elko really starting to produce D linemen at Texas A&M at a high level? Mm-hmm. You know, you lose all the guys you lost after the 24 season. You lose Cassius Howell, who I think was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year last year, you know, and then this year you refill him and you backfill him with Marco Jones and TJ Searcy and Sam Mpemba and Anto Saka. So interested to see what they do there. DJ Hicks comes back along the interior. I think talent-wise, you could argue, especially in the back end, you could have more talent, especially at linebacker. It's just how they all come together is going to be a big question. But Texas A&M at number 9. And then at number 8, Brian, we have the Oklahoma Sooners, a team that you've been really, really high on this offseason. And seeing what they've done over the spring is starting to confirm a lot of the things that we hypothesized could be true about this team. Trenches are coming along really well this spring. That's kind of, in my eyes, the crown jewel of this team. Heard a lot of great things about how their defensive line performed. Their offensive line is very experienced coming back. And then obviously, you know, you have John Mateer back at quarterback. He's somebody that, you know, we talked about being one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country coming back. And then obviously we love his relationship with Isaiah Satenga. And then the rushing attack looks like it's going to be dominant as well with Xavier Robinson and Torrey Blaylock coming back. So I really like what's going on at Norman. The biggest question for me with them is, can Brent Venables put it all together and have them be the team that they have the capabilities of being? And this isn't like a storyline of if you believe you can achieve and you can be whatever you want to be. Like, this is legitimately, you have the talent to be a playoff team. You have the ability to be a championship contender. It's going to be up to Brett Venables to end that streak of either going 6-7 or 10-3.
Right.
And that's going to be huge.
He is where Lane Kiffin was going into 2024. Could he actually have 2 good teams back to back? Or are they just going to take a big step back? Trev, you talked about, you know, the quarterback and the run game, and I love their portal pickups at receiver. I've said this before. I love getting Terrell Harris and Parker Livingston. The questions for me, as you mentioned, you nailed it. It's will their lines be good? And what you're banking on is 2 things. Number one is, did the offensive linemen who come back, is it good that you're getting all those linemen back? Like sometimes like 4 returning stars in the offensive line doesn't necessarily bode well because your offensive line isn't very good and you were hoping to upgrade and you weren't able to upgrade. Sometimes an offensive line coming together is like, look, you have real solid football players. You had new guys last year. You know, there's different things happen, some banged up a little bit, and they just couldn't quite put it all together consistently. But now that they've got a whole year of working together, and then you throw in Amarian Harris in there at right tackle, this unit should take another step. And that's going to be the big key for Oklahoma. Can their offensive line Just be consistently good. Not great, just consistently good. Handle your business week after week, snap after snap. Defensive line, there was a couple really talented younger players that we needed to see step up this offseason. And from the reporting we've seen and some of the things that we've read and we've seen, I think that's happened. You got Taylor Ween as a very talented player, one of the better D linemen in the SEC coming back. David Stone's a guy that's got loads of talent. Jaden Jackson had a really good offseason. Danny Okoye is a very talented young player that's coming along. I like that front seven. And the fact that Owen Heineke was granted a 6th year really helps their linebacking core as well. With Kip Lewis obviously coming back, getting Owen Heineke back is huge. And they've got one of the top 10 secondaries in college football. So there's no holes on this team in regard to them being a top 10 team, as long as their lines make just the typical what you expect them to improve upon in year 2. If there's a problem at Oklahoma this year, it's going to be certain people fail to live up to expectations or they have injuries again. That's kind of the way I look at it. But there's nothing on paper that tells me, boy, this is a major concern that they may take a step back. They should at least be where they similarly were where they were last year from a ranking standpoint. But I think they're going to be a better version of that number 8 to 9 team this year. Like last year, they were 8th more so because of what their paper resume said against an overrated schedule. This year, I think I have them, 7 to 6 to 8 range because I think they're legitimately one of the 6 to 8 best teams in the college football this year. And that's the difference for me. So this Oklahoma team should absolutely be very good this season. And now the question that we could ask is, okay, is this their ceiling or not? I think that's the thing that's an unknown. But I'm very comfortable putting them right here in the number 8 spot. Let's go to the number 7 team in the country, Trevor, and it's the Georgia Bulldogs. What's interesting is I said in a show last week, I'm higher on Georgia now coming out of the spring than I was going into the spring. And yet we still have them 7. Well, what gives, guys? I think this is a much, much deeper year in college football. That's a big part of it for me. The other thing that is my question mark about Georgia is I'm still not sold on their offensive line. That's my big holdup. But when I look at this team, Trev, there's a lot to like. Their running back room is very talented, very good. I think this is a breakout year for Nate Frazier coming up as long as the line can hold up, right? Yes, you lost Oscar Delt, but you're still very talented at tight end. They're going to be just fine at tight end. Love the Isaiah Canyon pickup. That's a very good pickup, Trev. Talon Taylor was a breakout for them this spring. He was a guy that we were very high on coming out of high school, coming out of the Chicago area. Notre Dame certainly wanted him. We loved him as a prospect. He ended up going to Georgia, redshirted last year, had a big spring for Georgia. So I think he's going to play a bunch. And their defensive line is going to be a typical solid Georgia defense. One of the things that has me feeling like Georgia could be better this year, meaning, okay, yes, they're an SEC contender, but let's be real, Trev. Georgia was not a team that was going to go on a run and win a title the last 2 years. They just weren't. Their ceiling was, okay, yeah, we can handle the regular season, but when we get into the postseason and we realize we can't match other teams skill for skill and we can't dominate them in the trenches the way that we used to, we're going to get beat. And that's exactly what happened to them in the quarterfinals each of the last 2 years. That's why they're 0 for 2 in the playoffs. But what I think about their front 7 is I think they have a couple potential elite playmakers this year up front. So they didn't have last year. Elijah Griffin, if he can be the player that the Georgia writers say he was this spring and what we thought he could be based on how good he was coming out of high school, then he's got star potential. And they haven't had a star defensive lineman in a couple of years. Their star pass rushers the last few years were like linebackers, like Jalen Walker, guys like that. He has a chance to be their most recent star lineman, something they haven't had in a couple of years. And then, of course, Raylan Wilson and Chris Cole are outstanding players. Justin Williams, I think, is going to be able to help ease the loss of C.J. Allen. Now, Cole and Wilson are going to replace him, but now he steps into that rotation role that Wilson and Cole had last year, Trev. So I think their linebacking room, whatever you think about Kirby Smart, the one thing he's been able to consistently do from the minute he got to Georgia until now, they just reload at linebacker every year. I mean, their D-line's been a little inconsistent. Their secondary's been inconsistent. Their offensive line's been a hot mess. All these different question marks. The one place I don't think I could go back and one time think of during Kirby's tenure that I'm like, that's a question mark, is linebacker. And they lose first and second round draft picks every year. And every year they replace him with some other dude that's going to be a day 1 or day 2 draft pick. And that's going to be no different. Here's what makes me higher on Georgia is this year they're going to be better at the skill positions than they've been the last 2 years. And that's especially true on defense. Some of the young studs like Ellis Robinson's now coming into his own. KJ Bolden's coming into his own. DeMello Jones is now a redshirt sophomore. They were a really talented recruiting class that are now kind of stepping into where now they're taking over the team. It's similar to what Notre Dame went through as guys like Leonard Moore and Tay Johnson and, Kingston, some of those junior, senior classes are now dominating the lineup. Now you say, okay, Notre Dame doesn't just have those try-hard guys anymore. They've got legit athletes. And Georgia hasn't had this kind of talent in the secondary. They've had good players, like third round to undrafted type of players. Late day 3 guys, the safety, Dan Jackson, Dalen Everett was a third round pick. They've got some first round talent in the secondary now. And that's the big difference. And I think the same thing is true at receiver, where the last couple of years, they had dynamic athletes. Zachariah Branch is a dynamic athlete, but there's a reason a guy that talented isn't a first round draft pick because he's not a great football player. There's a reason that Arian Smith, with his prodigious athleticism, was not a very high draft pick because they weren't great football players. I think the guys they have now, Sokovie White-Helton, Isaiah Canyon, London Humphreys, Taylor Taylor, they're actually good football players on top of being good athletes. And then Gunner's just, look, he's just a gamer. He's a winner. Like that's why I'm really high on this Georgia team. So this is the floor for me with them. And the reason they're here is because of more of how high I am on the rest of the teams that we're going to discuss. But this Georgia team is built a little bit different than some of their teams in recent years. And if Mike Bobo wasn't their offensive coordinator, I'd have him in the top 3 or 4. But ultimately, they're going to keep, and until proven otherwise, they're going to keep running the same offense they've been running, which means they're going to be very consistent in the regular season. But once they get to the postseason, their ceiling is capped. Is quarterfinals, maybe they can win one game if they get the right opponent. But most likely they're quarterfinals and done until Mike Bobo realizes what we've been doing isn't getting it done.
No, I'm with you, man. I think this could be the best Georgia secondary they've had down in Athens in quite some time. I love Ellis Robinson. He's in that new wave of up-and-coming corners. I think KJ Bolden is in that conversation and one of the best returning safeties in the country. And they've also had some people emerge. You mentioned Taylor in the offense. He has the ability to stretch the defense, something that I don't really think they had last year. I think they brought in Zachariah Branch with that initial idea, and then they used him more as kind of like that scat guy
because they realize he can't run routes and doesn't catch the ball down the field real well.
Exactly. Now I think Taylor brings that dynamic aspect to that offense. Another player to keep an eye out on, if you're a Georgia fan, is Dante Dowdle. He's a running back. He's somebody that also started to come on in the spring because Nate Frazier was kind of battling some ankle issues. He didn't play in the spring game. He was in and out consistently in the lineup over the course of spring practice. I think Dante Dowdle's a running back that could emerge as kind of the third head in that 3-headed monster in that Georgia backfield, because I'm also really high on Chauncey Bowens. He was a running back that, even though in the first game when they played Alabama, they lost, Alabama wanted nothing to do with Chauncey Bowens. Mm-hmm. Absolutely nothing. And it's kind of interesting that they stopped giving him the football, but it is what it is. But I'm with you on Georgia, man. I think that they're a talented team.
I'll just say this, Trev, before you move on to number 6, because there's people in the chat saying things like, we think they're underrated. And here's the thing. Everything that you guys are saying about the roster, we agree with.
Yeah.
They're ranked here and not higher because of what's on the sidelines, not what's on the field. And it's, well, Kirby Smart's a great coach. As I've said a bunch of times, Kirby Smart was a great coach when he had Todd Monken as his offensive coordinator. He hasn't been a great coach. They have not been a true title contender outside of maybe one season in 2017 with someone other than Todd Monken calling plays.
Yep.
You can't ignore that. You can't ignore that. And that's the thing that, to me, keeps them down. Other teams have caught up to them talent-wise, but those teams have, okay, we're talking about the number 6 team real quick, and I'll let you get into them, Trev, but who do you trust more in a big game right now, Shannon Dawson or Mike Bobo? Right now, I trust Shannon Dawson because he's actually won more big games the last couple of years than what Mike Bobo has, especially in the postseason. So just so you guys, we don't disagree with anything you guys are saying about Georgia's roster. We're very high on Georgia's roster. It's more my concerns about that, and then the Dan Schumann defenses have not been as good as the Dan Lanning defenses. 100%. That's the other thing.
Number 6 team, like you said, is the Miami Hurricanes. And this one for me, Brian, and I'll be interested to hear kind of your thoughts on your ranking for them. A lot of this, to be honest with you, was like confirmation bias with Miami and where we had them ranked. Now, there are people that kind of look at that team and they pay a little bit too much attention to what they lost, and I get it. Carson Beck is gone. The majority of the offensive line is gone. Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain are gone. You know, you lose Keontae Scott, and I get that. But you also have to look at what they bring back as well. And earlier when we did our way too early, you know, we talked about, you know, we expect the Darian Mensah-Cooper Barkhadi connection to be really strong. Spoiler alert, to the surprise of nobody, throughout spring, that connection is looking really, really good. They had some players on pitch counts a little bit over spring. They participated. It wasn't like the full-on like what Notre Dame did with Emil Wagner, you know, 2 years or, you know, last spring, where they were just like, hey, you're just like not going to do anything because you just played 971 snaps. They have players on a little bit more of a pitch count. You know, Mohamed Toure, Mark Fletcher, Malachi Toney, Elijah Lofton, and Ahmed Moten. They didn't play in the spring game. That didn't surprise anybody.
Trevor, if there's ever a guy that you should put on bubble wrap in the offseason, it's Mohamed Toure.
Man. Man. You're not wrong. Dude's gearing up to play his 8th year of college football, and it isn't just because he loves going to classes all the time.
He doesn't need the spring, bro. He doesn't need the spring. He's good. His son's going to be a freshman in high school next year. That dude's been in college so long, I say jokingly. But, like, protect him at all costs if you're Miami. Yes. He doesn't need the spring. He's an 8th-year freaking senior. He doesn't need the spring. Keep him healthy. Keep him healthy.
But a lot of what we've seen from them, it's continued growth under Shannon Dawson and Corey Heatherman, their defensive coordinator. Damon Wilson is looking like every bit of what we thought he was going to look like. Justin Scott is taking a nice step forward into being an every down player, not just that flashy rotational guy. Marquise Lightfoot is taking good steps in the right direction. And their offensive line is going to be young, relatively inexperienced, but talented. You know, their left tackle, Justin Cantwell, I believe, is that his name? That
Jackson.
Like highly
Jackson.
Yeah. Okay, Jackson Cantwell.
Big time left tackle.
Yeah, man. He's looking the part of being their starting left tackle.
Trev, I don't usually love freshman offensive linemen playing, but he's one of those different cats. Like, you'd still prefer he be able to kind of get worked in, but if you're going to have a guy capable of it, I do think he's someone that's capable. He has the talent, the size, and the strength to be able to more than hold his own as a freshman.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, he's been talented so far throughout the spring, and it's just continued growth. Some of the questions that also got answered to me were Mario Cristobal. Was this a flash in the pan, or are you going to put in the work necessary and be the consistent head coach to lead your team back to being another top 10 team? And so far, from what I've seen from him, it's looking really, really good. So Miami was definitely in the middle part, closer to the top part of my top 10 for me. Brian, I know they were for you in your rankings as well. That's why they're 6 in our joint one. But Miami's a very, very talented football team. Question that I have for them overall is depth.
Yeah.
Like, they're not at a spot where –
especially up front.
Yes, 100%. You're not at a spot anymore where if you lose, you know, a Ruben Bain, you can just put in Marquise Lightfoot, or like if you lose Damon Wilson, it's the outlook of their edge play is not as high. For sure.
100%. Completely agree. The interesting thing, Trevor, is does Miami look more like last year's Miami or the Miami from the year before? Because let's be honest about something. Outside of the Notre Dame game, which was a huge win for them, and that was not a fluky win like the Texas A&M game was. They beat Notre Dame. Like, you won't hear anything from me like, oh, you know, they got caught breaks. No, they beat Notre Dame. The interception that they made, that was a great play by the defender. That wasn't like a fluky play like we saw some of the stuff against Texas A&M. They beat Notre Dame. But outside of that, in the regular season, they've been the same team the last 2 years. They beat the teams they're supposed to, and they're going to have 2 losses where you're like, what the heck are you doing? So, yes, the postseason run was great, but, you know, like that team had no business being the 10th seed going into the postseason, Trev. Like, they should have been higher than that based on the talent they had. Look at all the high draft picks they had and the high draft picks they had coming back. It was because they just don't play to their potential as consistently as you need to. And that's something that still holds me back about Miami, especially when you look at the one different team that Miami had was a very veteran team in both trenches. They're not that this year. So are they going to go back to looking like they did in 2024 or now? The reason that I say I don't think they're going to go back to 2024 is because there's one big difference between the 2024 team on defense and the 2026 team on defense. And that's two words, Corey Heatherman. Yeah. That's the difference. It's not Lance Guidry. It's Corey Heatherman. And the ability for him to come in and get a bunch of new guys that had never played in his system before and get them going as quickly as he got them going said a lot to me. And yes, they lose some studs, but if you stop looking at what they lost and just look at what they have, you understand why Miami's once again going to be a title contender this season, Trev, because yes, they lost some guys up front, but they're going to have, like you said, they're going to have Jackson Cantwell back. They're going to have Samson Okololo, who's a former 5-star recruit. Matthew McCoy is a very experienced player. Ryan Rodriguez is a fifth-year senior that's played a lot of snaps in the rotation role for Miami. They're going to be absolutely loaded at the skill positions. One of the best receiver rooms in college football, because everybody talks about Cooper Barcotti, but the Vandrevius Jacobs pickup that they got from South Carolina was a very good pickup. Cam Vaughn from West Virginia was a very good pickup. You've got Joshua Moore is going to be a sophomore this year. It's not just the Malachi Toney and some solid guys like C.J. Daniels around him. They are a legitimate top 5 receiving core, and I think Elijah Lofton is more prepared to live up to the expectations people had from last year this year. He's a little bit older. Darian Mensah is not Cam Ward. My thing is, though, but he's perfect for that system, and he's going to have a lot of talent around him. Can the line hold up? That's the big question. And defensive line-wise, if Miami's defensive line stays healthy, that's going to be another big-time defensive line. If it doesn't, to your point, Trev, they have some depth issues that cause me a little bit of concerns. But Miami's one of those teams that they've just got to prove to me that they can just show up every week and not have losses at home to Louisville and not go on the road and lose to SMU, teams that they just flat out were way better than. That's going to be the big question for Miami, but I think they're certainly trending in the right direction, and this is another very talented team. I think the people that are not as high on Miami, they're just obsessing over what they lost, which I get. And they haven't earned the benefit of the doubt like an Ohio State has for, they lose guys every year. Who cares? They're still going to be big time. And I think that's where some of that comes from. And I understand it. I just think the talent is still really good. As long as the offensive line holds up. And part of the reason I think that'll be okay is because I think Alex Maribel is one of the best O-line coaches in college football. I think he'll be able to get that group figured out. And that's why I think Miami's, once again, creaming the crop in the ACC, and a team that I think is going to absolutely be going into the postseason or into the November once again with an opportunity to make the playoffs. Doesn't mean they got to go undefeated. If they handle their business in September and October, they can go on the road to Notre Dame. As long as you're competitive, you're still a lock for the playoffs because you're still going to win the ACC. And even at 11-1, you're going to be a top 7 or 8 team if your only loss is a really tough, hard-nosed road game at Notre Dame. So lose to Notre Dame the way that Notre Dame lost to you last year, and Miami's a playoff team. As long as you just don't lose to somebody, you're like, how'd they lose to that team? Because their schedule is – Miami fans are going to like this, but here's the reality. Their schedule's softer than Notre Dame's because they're each other's toughest game. But after that, Notre Dame's next 2 toughest games are BYU and SMU. The next 2 toughest games for Miami could arguably Duke and Wake Forest. So depending if you look at last year's record. Now, we think that Clemson's going to be better than that, but who's the next highest team that they have on our ranking, Trev? Isn't it Clemson? Who we have at 21?
Yeah.
So you can't have those bad losses. You do that, you're a playoff team, and if they get in December, Trev, they're going to be a team to watch out for because they can score.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Diving into the top 5 here, man, we got the Ohio State Buckeyes, and this is a team where I've started to see some very polar opposite things about the Buckeyes and kind of just the social media sphere, how people talk about them, even in the live chat on this show. So it's evaluating for what this team is. One of the biggest things that I like about Ohio State right now, man, is the fact that one report that I read coming out of spring is Julian Saint is looking to use his legs a little bit more this season, which is something that I think that he needs to do. with all due respect to Julian Santa, I know a lot of people talk about his completion percentage and he's an accurate quarterback, which I believe to be true. He's also not CJ Stroud. And he needs to be a player that has to utilize his legs a little bit more. He doesn't have to be a dual threat quarterback. He doesn't have to go out and rush for 600-700 yards this year. But I think that he can be a dynamic playmaker and move the chains a little bit with his legs. So hearing that was very promising. To the surprise of nobody, their wide receiving core is looking strong. Chris Henry starting to emerge, which I think is going to be very strong for them. And one guy that I've been high on going back since last year is Devin Sanchez. And by all reports, Archer, you can correct me if I'm wrong because I know you're in the chat today, but it sounds like Devin Sanchez is on the verge of becoming just an absolute stud. So I think their secondary is going to be a lot more complete than what some people think that it's going to be because, again, a lot of people pay attention to losses. Their secondary is going to suck because Caleb Downs is gone. Their secondary is going to suck because Davison Igbinosun is gone. Okay, well, I didn't think Davison Igbinosun was all that great to begin with. You could argue their cornerback play this year is going to be better. You're replacing Lorenzo Styles with somebody who has a higher ceiling at nickel corner. You have Devin Sanchez stepping in as a full-time starter. You have Jermaine Matthews going into year 2 as a full-time starter. So I like the back end of their defense. Question for me for Ohio State is how productive is their defensive line is going to be? Not compared to JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer or Caden Curry, but can this defensive line be what it should be this year? And that's the biggest question for me. They return a lot of experience on the offensive line. And then, of course, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but if Bo Jackson can be a really good running back for them and they can get a solid ground game going, Ohio State's going to be one of those teams that's going to be very, very hard to beat in November, December, and January.
Here's my thing on Ohio State, Trevor. I look at this team and I break it down for what it is, not what was lost or reputation or anything like that. And I look at this team and I say, there's some aspects of this team that are elite. But the reason that I have them 5 is because this is the most question marks that I've had on Ohio State. Now, listen, a question mark Ohio State team is still going to go 11-1 or 10-2, like we saw in 2023. Their roster in 2023, their team wasn't great in 2023. They still went 11-1. Beat Notre Dame on the road. Obviously went and lost to Michigan in the last game of the year, beat Penn State that year. So they still win a lot of games. But when I look at this team, here's some questions I have. Receiving core, I don't worry about. Running back room, I don't worry about. My question is, can Julian Sand really take another step? That's a question that I have. The offensive line is another question that I have. It's got potential. I'm a little bit more optimistic now on Ohio State than I was probably 2 months ago. And a big reason for that is because Ian Moore seems to have stepped up at left tackle, which is going to put Austin Sareveld at guard, which is sort of similar to the Notre Dame putting Will Black at left tackle. I don't think Ian Moore's as good as Will Black potentially. But what I mean is it allows them to get their best 5 on the field together. And I think Austin Sareveld could handle playing left tackle, but I think he's at his best at guard. It's kind of like Anthony Knapp. That's kind of my comparison, Trevor's. Austin Sareveld is a lot like Anthony Knapp. Can he play left tackle? Can you win a lot of games with him left tackle? Sure. Are you at your best when he's at guard? Absolutely. So Ian Moore stepping up while Austin Sareveld was a little banged up this spring, I think helps them there. So offensively, I actually think Ohio State's going to be better than they were last year. The uncertainty I have is really about I have no idea what Arthur Smith is going to be as a coordinator. I don't know. Here's my big concern on Ohio State, and here's why they're 5th, and here's why I could see them maybe underachieving even more than 5th. I have major questions about their front 7, not compared to how it was, just in general. I'm not high on James Smith. I said that when Notre Dame was looking at him. When people were like, I think Notre Dame might get James Smith, and I was like, I hope not. Now, maybe Larry Johnson can get him going. And if anybody can get him going, it's Larry Johnson. I'm not high on James Smith. I do like John Walker. Edric Houston's a very talented player, but he's got to take a big jump this year. And he's got to stay healthy as well. That's something. Will Smith is a nice player. I look at their interior, and I see a lot of good players. They shouldn't be able to throw waves at him, but they really need Edric Houston to become that 5-star people thought he was going to be. I like Kenyatta Jackson. I don't know that I'm completely sold that he's a star right now, the way that some people are selling it. I think it's kind of like just because he's the next best D-end at Ohio State, there's an assumption that he's this elite all-time player. And it's kind of like Caden Curry last year. Caden Curry's a really good college football player. He's not Chase Young. He's not Nick Bosa. He's not JT. He's not even Jack Sawyer, in my opinion. And that's kind of how I feel about Kenyatta Jackson. He's got to show me he can be that impact player. And even if he is, what about the other side? Zion Grady didn't play that much last year. The Russaw kid from Alabama didn't play a whole lot last year on a pretty mediocre front seven that dealt with a lot of injuries. He was highly ranked, but I don't know how good he's going to be. I worry about the trench play, and they're going to be good at linebacker with Peyton Pierce, a guy that Notre Dame wanted out of high school, a guy that I liked coming out of high school. Riley Pettijohn's a good football player. Christian Allegro's a good football player. There's a big step back, though, from the two freakiest athletes in the draft who you had a linebacker last year. And I think they're good football players, but are they like, no doubt about it, you're going to be the best defense in college football, which they were last year? That's my question mark. And so as good as the secondary is, and I think this is a secondary that's capable of being in the conversation with Notre Dame, with Oregon, is this the best secondary in college football? I think they absolutely belong in that conversation. My hesitation about their front seven is kind of what makes me say, okay, this is why I'm a little lower on them. Now, if I'm wrong and their front four is as good as it's been, then Ohio State will be once again a top 2 to 3 team. But I look at this team and I say, they just didn't impress me last year, Trev. We talked about it all year. They did not impress me. Even when they were winning games, they didn't blow me away. And then they went and played Indiana and just couldn't get anything going. They played Miami, couldn't get anything going. Miami was clearly the better team that day. And I'm just like, we're assuming they're going to just somehow get better this year despite losing 4 top 11 NFL draft picks. Because why? Because they've got Ohio State, because they got little Buckeye stickers on their helmet. Like, I just don't see a team that has the same talent level they've had the last couple of years. So while it's still a top 5 roster, I don't think it's a top 2 to 3 roster like they've had the last couple of years. I think they had the best roster in college football last year. I think the NFL draft kind of backs that up. And it'll back it up again this year because you're going to see guys like Jeremiah Smith, go high again this year. That's kind of where my holdup is in Ohio State. And if I were to move them, Trev, honestly, I'm going to, people I'm putting it on record so y'all can come back after the season if I'm wrong. If I was going to move them and say they're not 5, Brian, you can't rank them 5, where would you put them? I'd put them probably 7 and bump Georgia and Miami up. That's what I would do with Ohio State. I just am not sold on this team this year. They're going to be really good. Just not sold that they're going to be what they've been.
I get it. I understand that completely. And my way too early, I had them 6. I had them below Miami and Indiana in my way too early. So I get you completely, man. I understand. Number 4 team, Brian, is the Oregon Ducks. And this is a team where we needed to see some things from them coming into the spring. There were a lot of question marks. Well, let me phrase it this way. There are certain areas of this team where there were no question marks. I had 0 question marks about their defensive line. All 4 starters came back. You had the Amari Washington come back. Both of your edges come back. But we had questions about their offense, specifically the skill positions and like their receiving corps. It's like, what level are they going to be? I think sometimes they got a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because it's like, hey, they're Oregon. They're going to have good wide receiver play. It's like, okay, well, let's dive into who those receivers are going to be. You have Evan Stewart coming back off of a patellar tendon injury where he was unfortunately never able to make it back last year. DeCorian Moore is a kid that has tons of talent, but he needed to take a step from year 1 to year 2. And I think both of those boxes kind of got checked this spring. I mean, Evan Stewart came back and physically doesn't look like he's taken a step back. Still a little rusty at times, but he hasn't played football in almost a year. And so there are some things that we needed to see from him. I mean, he had a play in the spring game, and he was on a non-contact jersey. He was kind of like Aeneas Williams, basically their version of that for their spring game, and he absolutely torched their cornerback. Caught a wide open touchdown. I thought that was really impressive. DeCorian Moore looks like he's taking a massive step forward. So I don't know if there's going to be receiver play in the Big Ten could be something that's really interesting to follow this year between Indiana and Oregon and Ohio State. And
there are some pass catchers in the Big Ten this year, Trev.
Yeah, man.
And even on some of those kind of mediocre teams, like I really like the portal pickups at receiver that Iowa got. Like there's going to be some legit pass catchers in the Big Ten this year. This group's not going to take a backseat to anybody.
No, I'm very excited to see what they do in that room top to bottom. Dante Moore's veteran presence is being felt. He had a really strong spring game performance. his decision to come back, I think, was a good one. I thought it was a good one at the time, and it sounds like he's taken the necessary step forwards. And then arguably the crown jewel of that team, their defensive line, returning all 4 starters, is looking every bit of the part of a top-tier unit in college football this year. So I like what Oregon has coming in, man. I do. Very talented backfield, very underrated backfield in the Big Ten. Not a lot of people talk about their running back room. Biggest concern with me for Oregon is their offensive line, and if they're going to be able to protect Dante Moore and open up holes in the run game for their talented backfield. But if they're able to shore that side up, I love their secondary, very underrated part of their team. Brandon, that Finney kid is going to be one of the best cornerbacks in college football in the next couple of seasons after Leonard Moore leaves. He's a part of that wave with Devin Sanchez and Ellis Robinson and the kid from Oklahoma, and he's another up-and-coming player. Both of them are. I think the other kid's name is Ife Obadegwu. I think that's his name. That sounds familiar, but
he might actually be their best corner. Like, that's the thing I like about this cornerback tandem, Trevor. You and I can sit here and, if we wanted to, and we're not going to, argue about who their best corner is.
Yeah.
It's not because I think, oh, man, you are so overrating Brandon Finney. It's more about like, yeah, Brandon Finney's legit. I agree with everything you said. But if he's a baller, like, we could have that debate. It's kind of like what we thought we were, what we hoped we were going to have last year had Benjamin Morrison returned. You know what I mean? Like, who's better, Leonard Moore or Benjamin Morrison? You know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of debate, in my opinion. Like, I don't know if either of them are as good as Leonard Moore, but you get the point that I'm making on that one. That cornerback tandem is, and they're young. They're going to really good. And they might be better at safety this year, Trev. I know you're going to say it. I had to steal your thunder. They might be better at safety this year with Coy Parrish coming in. Sorry, go ahead, man. I'm fired up.
No, I get it. I think they will be better at safety. I don't think they'll be as athletic at safety. Dylan Thieneman is a freak athlete at safety, but I think he's a mid-level football player. I think he's fine. And look, I know there's 2 trains of thought because you can go and you can look at the numbers and not just like the raw stats. You can go look at PFF and talk about missed tackle numbers and all that stuff. And he was more productive at Oregon than he was at Purdue. I think that was more of a byproduct of going to a better defense. I do. I don't think that. I think Dylan Thieneman reaped the benefits of being a part of a better secondary than he was an overall elevator for that secondary. Mm-hmm. You could argue that Coy Parrish is an elevator at safety because I think that is a top-tier football player. That's how I feel about their back end. But, I mean, when you start getting into the top 5, you have to start entertaining the conversation of, like, kind of who has the less amount of holes. Because the margin between some of these teams are just so few far in between. And with Oregon, when I look at this roster, there's just not a whole lot of holes. They have talent on the offensive line. I don't question their level of talent. It's just, can they come together? Who's going to play where? It's questions like that. But I don't think that they're going to suck. I think their defensive line going into the season, I think they have the best defensive line in college football. Going into the season, I have questions around their depth because they lost a lot to the portal. But the reason why they lost a lot to the portal is because all 4 of their starting defensive linemen come back.
Right. And they went and got some guys, and they still have other guys that stayed. They were ridiculously deep last year on the defensive line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%, man. When I look at a team like Oregon, they just don't have as many holes as some of the other teams that we talked about so far. So they're in the top 5 for us.
Trevor, here's why Oregon's 4 and not higher. I have 2 big question marks about Oregon. One is they got 2 brand new coordinators. So there's just the uncertainty of how will they do. And we don't know the answer to that. And when you lose both coordinators, that can't be ignored. Those guys both got head coaching jobs in the Power 4 conferences. With Tosh going to Cal as a head coach and then Will Stein going to Kentucky as their head coach. That's a big one for me. And the second one is I actually do have some question marks about the talent of their offensive line at tackle. I think the interior of their offensive line's talented. I am not 100% sold on Fox Crater as being a big-time talent. And so I do have some question marks there. If I'm wrong on that, then I think their offensive line will be fine because they'll be okay up the middle. It's the tackles that has me concerned. And that only concerns me when they're playing the best teams on the schedule. Those guys are good enough to go beat everybody else in the Big Ten. It's more about, are they good enough, however, to stop the Indiana edge players, to stop the Ohio State edge players, the Georgia edge players, the Notre Dame edge players, teams like that. That is my question mark. Those are the 2 teams that I look at. Yep.
Yeah, 100%. The third team on our list, Brian, is the Indiana Hoosiers. Mm-hmm. And this is one where it comes into like our overall rankings and how we put this one together. Because I know your philosophy is you're the champs until somebody beats you, barring just an absolute vacancy of their roster from the year before when the team looks completely different. And Indiana has a lot of that, but you also have to look at what this team brings back. I had Indiana as my number 2 team, I believe. No, I had Indiana as my number 6 team. You had them as your number 1. We met in the middle. Per the ranking system, we had them at number 3 overall. And I like what this team is right now. Yeah, I go and evaluate what they did over the spring. I think Kobe Martin and Turbo Rashard are looking to replace what Roman Hembry and Kalen Black were as a running back duo. Nick Marsh is looking to be their number 1 receiver this year, which I think is really good for a player like Charlie Becker, who doesn't then have to go be the number 1 receiver at Indiana.
According to some mock drafts I've seen, Charlie Becker's a top 15 draft pick. Nick Marsh is in the top 25 range. So there's some people that think Charlie Becker's going to be their top receiver this year, Trev. And the point being is like, that's a dynamic 1-2, should be a dynamic 1-2 punch.
Yeah, it should be, man. Very interested to see how that receiving core looks. Defensively, I know a lot of people talk about, you lose Mikael Kamara, you lost some key pieces on defense. Toby Osunsamni is at a really strong spring and is starting to emerge. And Curt Cignetti talked about it after their, I forgot what they call it. It's basically their version of the blue gold game. It's like the red and cream game or something. And he went on to say that for the majority of the spring, the defense has actually kind of been a little bit ahead of the offense this year, which I think is a really promising sign. When you talk about how high we are on Josh Hoover and what he can do within that offense, you have a receiving core of Nick Marsh and Charlie Becker, good running back duo, very veteran offensive line coming back, arguably more talented than next year. So, yeah, I think that's an interesting facet to Indiana. We like the interior of their defensive line coming back. Linebacker, I don't have questions about. My only question with Indiana is, are you able, who steps up? Not if they have a guy, but it's just who steps up to replace like their D'Angelo Ponds. I think they have candidates to do it. I just don't know who that person is yet. That was one of my questions for Indiana. Toby's emergence in the offseason has started to make me feel a little bit better about who replaces Mikael Kamara. So those are some of my questions. I have faith. I think there's a track record of Curt Cignetti and Shanahan to get the most out of quarterbacks that they get. And you could argue that Josh Hoover might be the most physically gifted quarterback that they've gotten. I mean, they turned Fernando Mendoza from Cal into a Heisman caliber quarterback, and Curtis Rourke, who was at Ohio for like 4 or 5 years before he was in Bloomington, they turned him into a very efficient quarterback, took care of the football very well. So I like the overall talent on this roster. And again, I just go back to the conversation of what team has the least amount of holes, and Indiana is a team with very few of them.
I think in this chat shows it, Trevor, there's still a lot of fans just completely missing the boat on Indiana. Completely missing the boat. This notion that like, well, they had their run, now they're going to fall off. That's exactly what you all said to us last year when we had them in the top 10, and some people lost their minds of why we had them in the top 10. Well, we had them in the top 10 and they were too low, as we found out. Look, Nick Marsh is a football player that Notre Dame wanted out of the portal. Look, Charlie Becker was better than Omar Cooper was in the postseason, and their offensive line got back their 3 best players. And they added a kid from the portal who was an all Big Ten player last year. I would argue that they might be more talented at running back this year than they were last year. They're not going to be as good at quarterback from a consistency standpoint. I think Josh Hoover is going to make some plays. He's going to turn the ball over more, and he's going to have some misses that Fernando didn't have, and you're going to have to live with that. Defensively, there's a case to be made that they're going to be better on defense on the defensive line than they were last year. With all due respect to Stephen Daly and Mikael Kamara, who were outstanding college football players, they now have better NFL prospects on the defensive end than they had last year. Now, will they be as good as college players? I think that's a question to have, Trev. But like, if Indiana wasn't my number 1, they'd be higher than 6 for me. Like, they're a top 4 team, in my opinion, coming back. And I think people continue to miss the boat. They're going to have one of the best linebacking cores coming back. And you talk about losing D'Angelo Ponds, which is a huge loss. He's a stud. We've said that the other day, if he's a top 15 NFL draft pick if he's 5'11". Like, I don't think there's any doubt about that. So who are they replacing him with? They're potentially replacing him with Jamari Sharp, who's going to be a pick last year. He may take over as like that guy, or potentially A.J. Harris, who was a starter on a Penn State team 2 years ago that made it to the semifinals. And he wasn't the guy that Notre Dame was picking on in that game. A.J. Harris is not D'Angelo Ponds. So if you look at it as far as like, how do they stack up with D'Angelo Ponds? Well, then it's not as good. But if you look at it like this, how good could A.J. Harris, Jamari Sharp, and Rylan Gandy be as a cornerback trio? Forget who they had, but who they have. That's still a really good cornerback room. And then they get Preston Zachman out of the portal from Wisconsin. This is still going to, folks, and last I checked, Curt Cignetti and Mike Shanahan and Bryant Haynes are still on the sidelines at Indiana. And we watched those guys outcoach Miami. We watched them outcoach Alabama. We watched them outcoach Ohio State. We watched them embarrass Oregon on a big stage twice. Like, I just think fans are vastly underrating this football team. And I get it. Their fans are annoying, and Kurt Cignetti's kind of a blowhard. But he's a blowhard who's a fantastic football coach with a fantastic staff. And what I think people are missing, Trevor, is this is not a team that's just getting by on a bunch of try-hard guys that are coached incredibly well. There's a lot of NFL football players on this roster still for Indiana. And I think Indiana is, at least for the immediate future, here to stay. And I know fans are going to keep – it's going to happen every year, Trev. Oh, this is the year Indiana takes a step back. Well, maybe next year. It won't be this year. Barring injuries, because the one thing I don't love about Indiana, outside of defensive end, they don't have the depth to handle big injuries the way that they could last year. Maybe they could lose a receiver, because I think Shaz Preston is kind of going to step into that E.J. Williams role at receiver. But other than defensive end, I'm nervous about them dealing with some injuries that they've, like, if they have to do with that. But their starting lineup, I'd say their top 15 on each side of the ball can stack up against almost anybody in college football. And that's where I think people are making some mistakes as far as underestimating Indiana, because I'm more confident that they're going to get the most out of their talent than I am anybody else in college football because of what we've watched the last 2 years. And Kurt Cignetti took Indiana in the playoffs with Curtis Rourke at quarterback. You're going to tell me, forget Fernando Mendoza, you're going to tell me that Josh Hoover's not better than Curtis Rourke? Of course he is. And that's why I'm still high on the Hoosiers. So as annoying as their fan base is, Trev, and as much as I know you'd love for them to take a step back, I just don't see it. You know, and somebody in the chat says Indiana had many things go right last year, a lot of luck. No, they didn't. Guys, they went on the road and whooped Oregon and then beat Oregon by 30 in the semifinals. They beat Alabama by 35. What luck did they have? They thoroughly outplayed Ohio State in that game. And if the game was close because they missed on some opportunities, they outplayed Ohio State in that game. They did not luck their way into a 16-0 season where they had to beat Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, and Miami on the way to the championship. Like, there was nothing lucky about Indiana's lead last year. We are kind of like making ourselves try to feel better about Indiana winning a title by trying to do anything other than accept the fact that they were a great team last year. Are they an all-time great? No. I don't think they beat Ohio State from the year before. I don't know that they beat Notre Dame this year from what they were. I mean, in 2025, but they beat the teams that the best teams in the country. There was nothing lucky about that. Oh, they should have lost to Penn State. So freaking what? They didn't. And I'll take overlooking a bad Penn State team if it means, like, would you guys not, if Notre Dame next year barely beats Wisconsin, but then goes and beats Miami, beats Ohio State, beats Oregon, and beats Ole Miss in the postseason, would you guys then say they're overrated because they barely beat Wisconsin? No, we would not say that as Notre Dame fans. We'd say, yeah, they overlooked Wisconsin, but look what they did to all the good teams they played. They went on the road to Oregon and beat them by 10, and then beat Oregon by 34 in the semifinals. Would we then talk about, yeah, but they got lucky against Penn State? If they'd have lost to Penn State, guess what? They still would have been playing Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. They might have been even more motivated at that point in time because they would have had the head-to-head win over Oregon. So we are it's coping is what we're doing as Notre Dame fans. We're coping with the fact that Indiana won a title last year. Maybe Notre Dame would have beat them in the postseason, but that was a legit great team last year, Trevor. I think people are definitely underselling what Indiana was last year. You could argue that they're not the best team in the country this year, and I'll accept that because they would not be my number one if it wasn't for my you're the champs until somebody beats you thing. But I still think they're a top 5 caliber team. And you have them at 6, which is a top 5 caliber team. You're one off of that. I just think as a fan base, we're coping with the fact that Indiana's not legit. There was nothing lucky about their season last year. Nothing. And they're going to be very good again this year. Are they the best team? No, I don't think they're going to go undefeated. They have a much tougher schedule this year. You know, other teams are better, but this is still a legit title contender, in my opinion, Trev. I don't like doing it. Trust me, I would much rather say the run is over. You Hoosiers enjoy your time in the sun because it's over. I'd love to say that, but I'm not a liar, and so I won't say that.
You always have to give your flowers to somebody that's able to go out and prove it on the football field. One of the reasons why I love the 12-team college football playoff is you can have debates about, there was luck in the regular season. I mean, look, dude, there was luck in the regular season in 2012 when Notre Dame went undefeated. I'll die on that hill. I was at one of the games where there was luck. The Pitt field goal kicker missed a 22-yard field goal to send it into another overtime and keep Notre Dame alive after Sierra Wood fumbled. There's an sure. So if you want to die on the hill, if somebody wants to die on the hill that there was luck in any sort of season, sure, whatever. But also with that being said, the 12-team playoff allows teams to go out and prove it on the field that they should be or that they are what people believe that they are or aren't. And that's what Indiana did last year.
Mm-hmm.
You don't beat a team by 35 points for luck. You just don't. I'm sorry, man. I don't know.
And they
how
did
else
it twice.
To say it. Yeah.
They did it twice. It's not like they just did it once. They had that one great game against Oregon or Bama. They did it twice.
Yeah, 100%. And they're a good football team this year. I think Indiana being up in this top rankings is going to go into a conversation that we've had before, or that we're getting ready to have. Is that there's much more championship contenders this year in college football than there were the last couple of seasons.
Yep.
You sometimes just you have to give credit where credit is due, and that's where I'm at with Indiana. That's how.
Let's get to the last couple teams, Trev. Let's go to the number 2 Texas Longhorns. Take it away, Trevor Trowbridge.
Yeah, man. I mean, when I go and I look at Texas, I think that they have one of the top 3 rosters coming into the country. I've gone on record to say before that I thought that it was Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame, who I believe have the best rosters in college football. And then obviously it's close. It's not, those 3, and then there's just this wide disparaging gap where nobody else is close. Ohio State is close. Miami's close to that conversation. Indiana, for what their starting lineup is, I think is close to that conversation. So, but I think Texas is top 3 roster in college football, and I think so far over the course of the offseason, we're starting to see that. One of the biggest questions that we had about him was the hiring of Will Muschamp as defensive coordinator. And we talked about, what we started to see from them schematically throughout the spring, and I like it. I think they're playing into the strengths of what their defense can be, because we'd be remiss to say that they haven't lost a ton from their secondary over the last 2 years. And the overall level of talent is not what it was in years before when they had Michael Taff and Malik Muhammad and Andrew Makuba and guys like that. I don't think they have a player like that this year on their roster on the back end of their defense. So I think they're going to have to be a little bit more aggressive. And that's something that I think Will Muschamp is bringing to the table. Their wide receiving core is coming along nicely. Still have questions about what their offensive line is going to be. Questions about that. But overall, I think Arch going into his second year is going to look more like what people thought he was going to look like last year. I think arguably their running back room got better than where it was at a year before. And I think their wide receiver room overall is deeper, especially when you factor in they add Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo's a year older. So I like this team, man. They're one of the teams towards the top of my list when we get into that championship contenders conversation. But Texas is number 2 overall on this list for us.
I understand some of the comments about I don't trust Sark and things like that, but I just want to remind people that this coach that you don't trust has had his team in the semifinals 2 of the last 3 seasons. And so I don't think we can completely dismiss him like he's some bad coach who's never done anything. They had some bad losses last year, Trev, and they were a team that you and I said they're going to need time to get going. And when you look at the talent on the team, here's where we're taking a gamble, having Texas 2. Let's just be honest. Let's just be straight about it. Our gamble is we are more confident that Texas's line play will be improved this year. That's why they're here. There's no doubt they're going to be way better at running back this year. With Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers and James Simon, they got a freshman named Derek Cooper that might play for them this year. They're going to be better at receiver this year. They're going to be better on the D line this year. They were smart last year to go out and get some portal guys like Hero Canoe and Murad Watson that were multi-year guys. That's going to help their D-line this year. Yes, I know that they lost Anthony Hill. I think Rasheem Biles is a better football player. Anthony Hill is a freaky athlete, but he was never, in my opinion, a great football player. Rasheem Biles is a better football player than me. Anthony Smith is a really good football player. Their secondary is my big question mark. That's my question mark, along with, can Will Muschamp get him going? But from what I've read, reason I'm higher on him is what we've read is that they're a much more aggressive team this year. And I think that's a smart play. Don't sit back and ask your solid but not great secondary to cover and play a lot of zone and things like that. You don't have Jahdae Barron anymore at corner. You didn't have him last year. So attack. Use your athleticism up front. You might have the best DN in college football on your team. And Lance Jackson's no bum. Believe me, he's a very talented player as well. You've got, Zeno Zulu is a very, very talented football player that will help them this year. Justice Terry is a big-time, talent. They're going to have a lot of guys up front, Trev. And, by the way, they're going to have a 380-pound nose tackle this year that we had a chance to see up close and personal last year. And he was probably the best defensive lineman that Arkansas had in that game.
Yeah.
But their front seven's very athletic, very aggressive. Rasheem Biles has been a big-time playmaker the last 2 years at Pitt. Turn him loose. And that's what it sounds like Will Muschamp is going to do. But the big thing out of spring was the positive reviews about the offensive line. Now here's the thing. Beat writers tend to kind of pump the team that they're playing. But some of the people that I read glowing about the offensive line are people that I read said the line last year was a concern. Like they were people that weren't trying to sell us a bill of goods about the O-line last year. And that's what gives me reason. I like Melvin Siani from Wake Forest at right tackle. I think he's a good football player. Trevor Goosby's a good football player at left tackle. I think moving Brandon Baker into guard is going to be huge for him. He's kind of like their Anthony Knapp. He's not as good as Anthony Knapp, but he's okay at tackle, but moving him inside to guard, I think he's going to be a lot better. And then Connor Robertson returns at center. So my faith in Texas's line play combined with now Arch has a year under his belt is why I think this Texas team is going to be very good this year. And I understand they had some bad losses last year. Don't disagree. That's why I laughed at Texas people that were like, we should be in the playoffs because we were as good as any. Oh, yeah, you were really good on November 15th when Georgia curb stomped you again. They had a terrible loss to Florida, but this team also smacked Oklahoma. Now, it was a game where they had a punt return late, but that game was not competitive. This is a team that beat Texas A&M convincingly, a team that beat Notre Dame last year. They played Texas A&M home. Yeah, so did Notre Dame. So this is a good football team. And they thoroughly outplayed Vanderbilt. That game to me was not as close as the final score, 3-point game. They also had some big wins last year. And I think the improvement in the line play and Arch now having experience is why I think this team is going to be more consistently, at times last year, Texas looked like a top 5 team. And at other times last year, they looked like a team that doesn't deserve to be ranked at all. This year, I think what we see is more consistently that top 5 team like we saw in 2024 because they were a top 5 team against everybody not named Georgia. They look like a top 5 team against Ohio State. They were 2 yards away from tying that ball game up with 2 minutes left. The only team that's made them not look like a top 25 team or a top 5 team is Georgia consistently. And that's why I'm higher on Texas. I have the same concern some of you guys do have about Sark. But I also look at the roster that they have and say, that's a really flippin' loaded roster. And he's also a guy that has also had some big wins in his time. And hey, he beat Nick Saban. You know what I mean?
In Tuscaloosa.
In Tuscaloosa. And that was a playoff Alabama team. Better than the team we've seen the last 2 years. So I think Texas is going to be a very dangerous team this year. And if we're wrong, I know exactly why we're going to be wrong. Because Will Muschamp ain't cut out for the modern game, and their line play on offense isn't as good as we hoped it would be. If we're wrong, it's those 2 reasons. And if we're right about those 2 things, then Texas is a legitimate title contender.
Agreed 100%. Number 1, rounding out our list, Brian, is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. It's just because we're a Notre Dame channel. Cut. Have a great day. Thank you for coming to the Irish
Not it.
Podcast.
That ain't it at all.
No, it's not. I've said this before. I'm not shy about saying it again. I think Notre Dame top to bottom has the best roster in all of college football. I do. When you combine everything, returning starters, returning production, depth waiting in the wings, we talk about the amount of questions on this team and limiting questions. Those are clear indicators of being a top 5 team, a top 10 team, a top 15 team is limiting the amount of questions. I have very few questions about Notre Dame. I do. It's to varying degrees. And obviously my questions with Notre Dame are going to be a little bit more heightened because I follow the team every single day. I don't follow the Indiana Hoosiers every single day. I don't follow the Ohio State Buckeyes every single day. But my questions for Notre Dame are schematically, what are we going to see from Chris Ash to varying degrees? But I have to believe that even if he rolls out the same exact game plan that they did against Miami, Purdue, and Texas A&M, to some level, it will be better. Like the performance on the field will be better. Doesn't mean I'm going to like it, but it's going to be better because it's not going to be brand new. My questions for this team are who steps up at boundary? Because right now, the guy that I think could be the leading candidate for boundary that starts in the fall, I have yet to see put on a practice jersey in Quincy Porter. I think Mikey Gilbert could be a weapon in the boundary, but he's got to stop being the offseason warrior and translate that over into in-season production. Those are some of the things that I want to see. The questions that I had going into the offseason about the offensive line, as far as alignment, I don't have anymore. I watched Will Black be the number one left tackle throughout the entirety of spring. I watched Anthony Knapp get kicked inside the guard. I watched Gerby Lambert be out at right tackle.
And look good doing those things.
Exactly. It wasn't they just did it for fan service, but they sucked. I watched the defensive line take progression. There's nothing like, look, guys, and you can call me a homer. There's nothing that I have to see from Leonard Moore this offseason. Not a thing. Not a one. He was the bona fide number one cornerback in the country last year. There's no reason to think that he won't be that.
Not our opinion. Unanimous All-American.
Yep.
That wasn't just our opinion.
Yep. 100%. I understand that their depth was thin at linebacker this year or in the spring because we didn't see Drake Bowen. We didn't see Kingston. Madden was not full go until the tail end of spring. But then I also then proceeded to watch Jaden Osbury look like he had been starting at Mike line. Like Jaden Osbury played so well this year in the spring at Mike linebacker that it looked like he was the returning starter at Mike linebacker. He looked very natural at that position. Got a freaky athlete in Jalen Sneed playing alongside him, who's also starting to grow as an off-ball linebacker. So I had Notre Dame as my number one on my revised top 25. I had them as my number one returning team in my way too early top 25, and I had them again here because it's talking about who should be in this position going into the season. I have very few questions about them. We talked a lot about coordinators, and Oregon doesn't have Will Stein anymore, and Will Muschamp is coming back in at Texas. How does he adjust to the modern game? I don't have a lot of questions about Mike Denbrock. I have questions about how Chris Ash is going to handle the level of talent on defense, but the floor is not as low as where it was at last year because it's not new. It's just this.
And they know it,
like the scheme or no. Exactly.
If he wants to run some boring scheme, the players know it now, and they can run it now. Look, it's real simple for me. You want somebody other than our opinion on this? All right, cool. Looking at various mock drafts, somewhat reputable mock drafts, I've seen 8 different Notre Dame players mocked in the first round for next year, including a kid who we've yet to see put on a Notre Dame uniform. I just watched Bill Bender from Sporting News. Did not run this by me. He doesn't answer to me for anything, even though he does a show on CFB Nation, but he doesn't know us anything. I pay him very, very little to do that show. They don't do it very often. His bread and butter is giving his honest opinions to the national. He has Notre Dame and Texas as being number one, tied for number one in most top 50 players on next year's NFL draft. It's not my opinion. Bill Conley, ESPN, not a big pro Notre Dame guy, has Notre Dame ranked number one in college football in returning production. I see ESPN, again, not a pro Notre Dame outlet, say that CJ Carr is the best returning quarterback in college football next year. Now, we could debate if that's true or not, but again, these aren't our opinions as Notre Dame people. These are national opinions. And one of the guys that one of the 8 guys not ranked in the or projects a first round pick is someone who Sporting News ranks as the number 27 overall player in the country next year, looking at the draft board. You're talking about a team that's got a defensive end that's being projected as a potential first round pick, a team that's got a linebacker that's being projected as a first round pick, a team that's got a corner and a safety, and actually 2 corners being projected as potential top first round picks. The defense has elite talent. And we saw that for most of last season once Chris Ash kind of got his head out of his you-know-what. You look up front of the offensive line, they finally have 5 guys in position. The depth is very strong. I'm not as concerned. I don't have as many I need to see it from the receiving core as you do, Trev, because that's just a position in the history of college football and at Notre Dame that experience hasn't meant a whole lot. Golden Tate went from 6 catches as a freshman to 1,000 yards as a sophomore. Will Fuller went from 6 catches as a freshman to 1,000 yards as a sophomore. Equanimous St. Brown went from 1 catch as a freshman to 950-something yards, I think, as a sophomore. We've seen that. We saw Miles Boykin go from like 13 career catches to the 3rd round NFL draft in 1 year. right? It's just not one of those positions where experience carries as much weight. It's more about, do you have the talent? And when I look at this receiving core, it's just a different level of talent. And in fairness to Trev, this is only your second spring of watching Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So like, you don't have the same, bro. I've seen some springs where, trust me, if you'd have seen those springs, you'd feel a whole lot different about this spring. You know what I mean? So I get your hesitation, and I totally understand it. When I look at this team and people want to continue to question the receivers, and that's fair. They've got to go prove it. But number one, I saw Notre Dame make it to the title game 2 years ago with Jeremiah Love playing on one knee, and a team that had Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, and Jaden Harrison as your veteran players, and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison balled out in the playoffs that year. Well, guess what? They're both back, and one of those guys is fighting to even start this year. So if a team with Bo Collins, who's a solid player, Chris Mitchell, who I think is now like coaching at Notre Dame 2 years later, and Jaden Harrison can make a playoff run, then forgive me for not being concerned about a team that has those same two players at the top coming back, but older and better, and Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter and Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert and Elijah Burris now having to rely on those guys. And, oh, by the way, Devin Fitzgerald, Bubba Frazier, and Caden Finley. Like, you'll forgive me for not being like, gee, I don't know if we have the firepower to go out there when I just watched them play for the title with the players I just mentioned. And I'm not trying to disparage those guys. I love Bo Collins and what he did for that Notre Dame football team. But he was an undrafted free agent. So was Jaden Harrison. So was Chris Mitchell. The two guys that balled out in the postseason are still here. How many teams in college football can say they have a wide receiver that has had a 100-yard performance in both the national semifinals and the national title game? How many teams can say that? I know one that can. It's that team we got ranked number 1. I watched Jordan Faison torch the Indiana secondary. Same guys we saw last year in the postseason. He's back. So that's why I'm not as down on the Notre Dame, receivers as maybe some other people are in the chat. Like, gee, I don't know. No, they don't have a Jeremiah Smith. But I also watched Miami beat Ohio State last year when their star receiver had 5 catches for 16 yards, and they still beat Ohio State by 10. So I don't think that that's something that you necessarily need to win a championship. I think it's more about who do you have under center and what do you have in the trenches. And here's the thing. Notre Dame's receivers don't have to play against Ohio State's receivers. They have to play against Ohio State's secondary. The Ohio State's receivers have to play against Notre Dame's DBs, which I think we're not the only ones who are going to think are the best in college football. It's about how do you handle those other units. Now, say, okay, well, you guys think Ohio State and Oregon secondaries are very good. Yes, we do. And that's going to be a challenge. Notre Dame's receivers are going to have to step up in that regard. But I like Notre Dame better in the trenches. Somebody in the chat earlier said, Ohio State's got a better D-line. No, they don't. No, they don't. You're living in the past. They don't. So I think this team is loaded. It's our opinion that they're loaded, and it's not just ours. And that's the thing that I think can give you some. If you guys are in the chat thinking, well, of course you guys say that, you're Notre Dame fans. Well, sure. We've never hid that fact. But I think if you look at what other people are saying about Notre Dame, you're going to see that we're not alone in thinking that this is a top 3 to 5 team. But here's the other thing I'm going to say. If you wanted to tell me you thought Texas, Indiana, Oregon, or Ohio State should be ranked higher than Notre Dame, you know what I'm going to not do? Spend the next 30 minutes arguing with you. Because I think, or Miami, or Georgia, because there's a lot of good teams in college football, Trev. We'll get into that next. But I think when you look at the depth of this team in the trenches, the athleticism they have at all the skill positions, the fact that they return one of the better quarterbacks in college football, and they return both coordinators, actually all 3 coordinators. I think all those things have the makings for this team being very good. If you look at number 2, they have a new defensive coordinator. Number 3 returns everybody. Number 4 has 2 new coordinators. Number 5 has a new offensive coordinator. In competitive games, those things can matter. And that's one of the reasons why when I look at Notre Dame, I think that they have the right to be ranked number 1. Now, I have them ranked number 2 because Indiana is my number 1 because of what I said. But if you were to ask me who do I think is going to be better, Notre Dame or Ohio State, Notre Dame or Indiana, I'd say Notre Dame. But I had Indiana number 1 because I have a rule. You're the champs until somebody beats you, unless you have some crazy turnover, and Indiana certainly did not have that this past season. So that's why I have them number 1, but that's where I'm at for this one.
Brian, we just wrapped up our post-spring top 25 on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And now we're going to get into a little bit of a different discussion before we dive into the mailbag to take us home today. And the simple question is, who are the real title contenders amongst this? And this is room for debate. In previous years, there have been, it's kind of just 2 teams above the rest. In other years, it's like, hey, the field's pretty open. And I think that this year in college football, it's leaning a little bit more towards the latter. I think that there is a handful of championship contenders this year. And we could talk about to varying degrees, because the lower we get on the list, the more questions that I need answered when we talk title contenders. But I don't think that this is a year in college football where there's just 2 teams, 3 teams. I don't think that there's one team head and shoulders above everybody else. It's just primed and in a prime position to go win a national title. So I think that's really interesting. I'm looking forward to this discussion, man, because I think there's a lot of title contenders this year in college football.
Agree, Trevin. And before we dive into those specific teams, here's a difference. I think you could argue that if we compared the number of teams that are contenders this year compared to the number of teams that were last year, my initial thought was there's more contenders this year. And I took a step back and I thought to myself, you know what? I don't know that I agree with that sentiment. I think there might have been more contenders last year, but here's the difference. Last year, there were more contenders because I didn't think there were any separators. It was more about there's more teams because the top teams aren't as good as they've been in the past. I just got done. I went, I guess I don't know that I'd call it a rant. It's a little bit of a rant as to why fans are disrespecting Indiana, and that last year's team was legitimately good and clearly the best team in college football last year. They didn't luck their way into a championship. But I've also said in the past that team would have in my opinion, got smacked by the 2024 Ohio State team, the playoff version of Ohio State. I don't think that last year's Indiana team beats Michigan in 2023. They definitely don't beat 22 and 21 Georgia. They definitely don't beat 20 Miami. They definitely don't beat 2019 LSU. They get smacked by 2018 Clemson. Like, if you stack them up against a lot of the best teams in the past, I mean, if you put them in 2018, they're Notre Dame maybe in 2018. Maybe. And I still don't know that they're as good as that Notre Dame team was in 2018. They got smacked by Oklahoma, Clemson, and Alabama that year. So while they were the best team in college football last year, no doubt, where do they stack up historically? I don't think they stack up as well because as the last 2 years we have said, they weren't great years in college football. So I think that's more of what it was, where 7 was close to 1 last year because 1 wasn't great. There were more holes in some of those teams. When I look at this year, Trev, and I evaluate the top teams in college football, what I see are more teams with the capability of becoming truly elite teams, not just the best this year, but elite teams. Like Ohio State's 2024 champion, I think, gets obliterated by the 15 team that didn't play for championship. You know what I mean? Like, there's been some years where Ohio State didn't win a title where they had a way better team from start to finish than Ohio State 2024. They got hot in the playoffs, but as a team all year, they weren't an elite team. They were an elite talented team, but they weren't an elite team. When I look at this year, Trev, and the reason that I won't, maybe pound on the table as much about why I have teams in certain spots is because what's different this year is I think there's more legit, potentially big-time teams than last year. I also think there's a break where there's a big drop-off between the last team that we'll talk about and maybe the rest of the teams in college football. But even then, there's a couple teams outside the list that I'm going to talk about today that we'll talk about at the end that could potentially sneak in there. So let's kind of begin this conversation, Trevor, and dive into the teams that we think, and let's go by conference, dive into the teams that we think these are the best of the best. And it's somewhat related to our preseason top 25, but it won't be necessarily entirely. So let's start. Obviously, we'll talk about Notre Dame just briefly. There are both of we think are the top team in college football, talent-wise. Now, there's things Notre Dame has to prove. Can you show up every week? and win the games you're supposed to win? Can you beat some of the better teams in your schedule in the regular season? We know you can do it in the postseason, but can you beat Miami in the regular season next year? Can you go on the road and beat BYU in the way you couldn't beat Miami? I mean, I would argue that you and I think higher of, well, especially, it's going to sound like a shot, Trev, but I don't mean it that way. I would argue that you're higher on BYU going into this season than you were Miami going into last season.
It's close, but probably.
You didn't have them as a top 10 team last year, Miami. So the point is, there's some teams on the schedule that Notre Dame has to prove that you can beat in ways that they didn't last year. But talent-wise, this is a loaded team. There's no doubt to me that Notre Dame is a legitimate title contender this year. Like everyone, there's things they have to prove. Every team in college football on April 28th has things they have to prove. Question marks or whatever. Notre Dame is no different, but I think there's no question about it. And if you look at a lot of people, again, you want to say, oh, we're Notre Dame homers. Big loves to point out that, we're pro Notre Dame. Fine. Look at what other people that aren't Notre Dame people are saying. Tied with Texas for most top 50 NFL draft prospects next year. 8 different players projected by somebody, not us, to be a first-round draft pick next year. Best cornerback in college football coming back. ESPN thinks they have the best quarterback in college football coming back. 2 of the best portal pickups in the offseason. I mean, look, whether we think of Quincy Porter, On3 had him as one of the 20-something best portal players in the entire country this past season. And they got a lot of guys that have been on the big stage. Tion Grace played in the playoffs. Keon Keeley's played in the playoffs. Francis Brew had to play against Notre Dame last year in November in a top 25 matchup. Like, they're getting guys that have played on big stages as well as getting talented players. And so I think that's why I think there's no doubt that Notre Dame is a legitimate title contender. Will they win it? There's a lot between now and then, but they're certainly a title contender this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have much more to add. I've made my opinion on Notre Dame and their ability to contend for a title well known, to the point where in shows I've talked about, if not this year, then when. I don't think that Notre Dame is in a championship or bust mode, but I do think if you don't win it this year, or at least come pretty darn close to winning it this year, I do think you can healthily ask the question, okay, if it's not this year, then are we just going to be playing that game of just wait until? And then we have to be realistic as fans and say, just wait until it's kind of a down year in college football. You know what I'm saying? So, like, that's how I feel about Notre Dame. I feel very strongly about their abilities. But let's split this up into conferences like you talked about. We'll start with the Big Ten. And I think that similar to other years, I think that it's very, very top heavy in the Big Ten. I'm confident in saying that I think Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana are the 3 teams, and they're the class of the Big Ten in terms of competing for a national championship this year. I mean, when I go and I evaluate the league for what it is, those are some of the teams amongst the top. I mean, in the country, not even just in the top of the Big Ten. Ohio State is always mentioned. I think Ohio State on FanDuel right now is still the favorites to win the national championship this year.
Look what I got for you, Trev. Boom.
Bang.
Right there. I think this graphic also backs up what you just said, Trevor, about the Big Ten being top heavy. The number 1, 4, and 5 teams in FanDuel's odds to win a title are from the Big Ten. And this is another example of, it's not just a couple Notre Dame guys that think Notre Dame is a legitimate title contender next year. Here's a betting service that says the same thing. They have Notre Dame number 2. And you see 3 of the top 5 teams are from the Big Ten, which backs up the point that you just made, Trev, about the strength of the Big Ten at the top. It's just like it was last year. The top of the Big Ten is really good, and that's been true the last couple of years, but especially last year. We thought Penn State had a lower floor. Oregon would have made a deeper run if they didn't have to play Ohio State in their first game in 2024. They had a bad draw. So once again, the Big Ten at the top 2 to 3 teams are loaded in legit title contenders.
Yeah, 100%. And the next teams up in the Big Ten, I don't think are overly close to entering that discussion.
Agree.
I mean, unlike the SEC, which is a conference we'll get ready to talk about here in a second, the SEC, you could argue, could potentially have, now the further down you go on the list, the more things have to pan out for those teams. But unlike the SEC, I think in the Big Ten, it is clearly Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon. And the next closest team out of that conference would be who? Michigan, USC, who right now on FanDuel have lower odds than like LSU and Texas Tech. Texas Tech on FanDuel still has better odds than Michigan to win the national championship, and they just lost their quarterback.
Trev, if you look at our rankings, the ones that you and I just put together, the next Big Ten team we have in our rankings is Iowa.
Yeah.
After those three. So, yeah, and you look at Ohio State, Trevor, you know, I said all the things I said about why I just don't think they're as good as they've been in recent years. But they're still a team that can go win it all. They're still a team capable. When you have the secondary they have, you have the receiving core they have, if their offensive line is as good as I think it can be, they don't need their defensive line to look like the 2015 or 2014 defensive line. They don't need it to have a Chase Young there. But when you're splitting hairs between elite teams, what we're trying to do in our top 10 rankings, Trevor, is differentiate between of the title contenders who has the best chance. It doesn't mean they're not a title contender. It just means I think 4 teams are better. Now, FanDuel sees it a different way. They think that Ohio State has the best chance to win it. But when you look at the Big Ten, I think Indiana's right there behind Texas and Notre Dame. Oregon is right behind Indiana. There's no doubt that the Big Ten has a great shot to once again have a team in the title game, if not multiple teams in the semifinals. I mean, look, they've done it. They did it 2 years ago. They had 2 teams in the semifinals, correct? And I think if Ohio State didn't have to play Miami, like there's other draws, like Ohio State got a little bit of their own medicine. You know, this year is they had to kind of play the hot team going in Miami, kind of like where Oregon had to play the hot team the year before. They got a little bit of that payback. There's other teams that if Ohio State's playing Ole Miss in round 2, or if Ohio State's playing Georgia in round 2, maybe they win a game. But there's a chance again that the Big Ten once again could have a 4th straight national champion. There's no question about it. And it's because there are multiple teams, Trev. It's like if it was just Ohio State and then there's nothing else after that, which we've seen in the Big Ten in the past. It's like Ohio State and then like nobody else. Well, Ohio State gets a bad draw, then the Big Ten's done. It's different now. I think there's 3 teams that have a legitimate chance to win a championship out of the Big Ten.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if we're talking about the Big Ten in 2019, if Ohio State wasn't going to go win it all, then no team from the Big Ten was going to go and win it all. I'm with you there completely. Let's talk about the SEC, Brian. And this is a conference that you and I believe is going to be deep. It was deep last year. I think it's going to be deeper this year. But to a point that you made earlier in the show in this segment, I think it's going to be deeper because the number of elevated teams, I think, is going to be greater. I think Texas is going to be better than what it was last year. I think Georgia is going to be better than what it was last year. I think LSU is going to be better than what it was last year. Then you still have some other teams at the top that are like, yeah, I don't think Alabama is going to contend for a title this year, but they have the individual pieces that they could. Like, that's the thing. So the SEC
they're not what they were under Saban, Trev, but they're still a team that we both have in the top 15. Mm-hmm. And that team can beat you on any given Saturday, you know, unless you're a 5-17 from the ACC. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. But, you know, like the SEC, to me, the question about the SEC is this, Trev: how many actual title contenders do they have? And I think right now, I confidently believe they have 2. And I think there's a drop-off between the top 2. So in the Big Ten, we think there's a drop-off between the top 3 and everybody else. In the SEC, it's the top 2. What I'll say, though, is the drop-off between the top title contenders in the Big Ten is much greater than the drop-off between the top 2 title contenders in the SEC and what comes next. Like A&M, LSU, Bama all have a better shot than the 4 and 5 teams in the Big Ten. So, like, the top 2 teams in the Big Ten, I think, have a better shot to win it than the top 2 teams in the SEC based on kind of how we view things, right? Or at least based on certainly how FanDuel views things. However, I think if we saw the expanded FanDuel graphics, that we would probably see 3, 4, 5 SEC teams before we get to the next Big Ten team, unless they overhype USC the way that some people do. Well, but there'd be a lot more SEC teams in that top 20 than there would be Big Ten teams.
Yeah, I mean, if we just go, I have the expanded list pulled up here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more SEC teams before you get to the next Big Ten team.
Okay.
Yeah, you got Texas A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma all have better odds to win the national title than Michigan and USC, who are back-to-back tied at plus 3,500 odds to win it all.
Yep. There you go. So, Trev, when you look at the SEC, I think Texas is a legitimate title contender. There are questions that they have to answer. We talked about in our top 25 rankings. Are they actually good enough in the trenches? Because to a degree, Trev, some of this stuff from FanDuel's, it's the Texas hype.
Sure.
Like some of the stuff from us is buying into the Texas hype. I would argue that our hype isn't from what other people are saying. Our hype is from putting in the film and saying, man, they played like crap as a team, but that dude's really talented. And man, they didn't do this as a team, but man, that dude over there is really talented. And then looking what they did in the portal and just saying, like, guys, the Arch Manning we saw from the second half of Mississippi State on is not the Arch Manning you saw in the first 5-6 games of the year. It's just not. And that's kind of what we thought we were going to see. So they're a very talented team. They've got to answer some questions, but so does Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got to prove that they can win a championship as well. I mean, if you look at this list right here, Trev, there's only 3 coaches of these 7 teams that have proven they know what it takes to win a championship. And that's Ryan Day, who's in the number 1 spot, Kurt Cignetti, who's in the number 4 spot, and then Kirby Smart, who's in the number 6 spot. And only 2 of those 7 have shown they know what it takes to do it in a 12-team playoff, because Kirby Smart is currently over when it comes to – I mean, Kirby Smart's won as many playoff games in a 12-team playoff as Bob Chesney at James Madison. 0. You know, so – but the point is like that you can't discount Georgia. And I even think this is going to be the best Georgia team in the last couple of years. I think this could be Georgia's best team since 2022. It just so happens that team is coming about in a year where I think it's also the best team Ohio State's had since, maybe 2019. It's the best, and that includes the title team from a couple of years ago. You could at least debate it for the regular season. Now, I don't think this Ohio State team is going to be as good as that Ohio State team was in the postseason, but in the regular season, this could be Notre Dame's best team in a very, very long time. This team at Indiana they're reloading, in my opinion. This could be Oregon's best team in a while. This could be their best team since 2014. This Miami team could end up being better than last year's Miami team who played for the championship. So that's the thing that hurts Georgia a little bit, but I think this Georgia team is very good. The next group of teams on the list for the SEC have some legitimate big red flags that keep them from being legitimate title contenders. We have A&M at 9. We have Oklahoma at 8, A&M at 9. But I think there's a bit of a gap between like Georgia and Oklahoma right now. Even though there's only 1 spot between them in our ranking, there's a much bigger gap. And then A&M at 9. To me, there's a clear delineation as of today between Georgia and Texas and then everybody else, even though I do think some of those teams are closer to jumping in than the next group of Big Ten teams. I do still think there's a gap between the top 2 and the next 3 or 4, which is what A&M, it'd be Oklahoma, A&M, LSU, and Bama would be the next 4.
Yeah, there's a clear gap in my opinion, but I'm with you because here's the difference when I look at those. With the SEC teams that are kind of next in line in that conversation, it's like you need this to work out, but it's a plausible thing to work out. Like for Texas A&M, it's like you have to get shored up in the trenches, but you arguably have the pieces to do it. Mm-hmm. For Alabama, it's like, hey, can Kalen DeBoer have that mindset switch? Like he is currently the head coach at Alabama, and he has all the power and all the control to have a mindset switch of how that team should be ran and operated. For the Big Ten, you need players at Michigan and USC to play above their God-given abilities, if you ask me, for them to be title contenders. You don't have that conversation with Alabama and Texas A&M and LSU and Oklahoma.
Right.
Like it's for and sure, like we could talk about quarterbacks. Like for Marcel Reed, I need to see a higher level of consistency, but I think that for Texas A&M to be a successful team, they don't need him to put on the Superman cape. For Michigan to be a national title contender, you need Bryce Underwood to be Superman. And I just don't know if he's capable of doing that as a true sophomore in college. Like that's the thing. So,
and unfortunately for Iowa, they only have Clark Kent at quarterback.
Well,
they have the version of Superman that gave up his powers for his family and kids.
Well,
you know what I'm talking about? Like from the TV.
Unfortunately, the unfortunate thing for Iowa is they have a head coach that only wants his quarterback to be Clark Kent.
That's right.
That's the biggest issue.
Right.
But there's
bigger talent discrepancies in my opinion. Like Alabama's only a couple spots ahead of Iowa and USC, but it's because of issues not related to talent on the roster. It's more about what's on the sidelines. Where with Iowa, I know we give Kurt Ferentz a hard time for his offense, but he's also a big reason why they are still at least always a top 20 to 25 team also.
Yep.
That consistency. But it is, to me, when I look at the SEC, there's a better chance that Oklahoma, A&M, LSU, and Bama could figure some stuff out, and their talent plays to a level that allows them to say, hey, that team could be a title contender. I tend to lean towards LSU in 2027 as a team I'm going to be concerned about. If I'm the SEC and I'm Notre Dame and teams that are like worried about it, let Lane get a year under his belt. They'll have some guys coming back, and then another year of going to the portal. That's when I think LSU becomes a little bit more dangerous. Alabama becomes dangerous the minute Kalen DeBoer realizes I'm not at Washington anymore. They immediately become a much more dangerous football team. And then A&M and Oklahoma, like they're 8-9. They're not that far away. For Oklahoma, it's about, well, actually for both teams, it's about, are your lines as good as we think? And can your gamer quarterbacks be more consistent?
Yeah.
You know, can they have a Will Howard jump? You know, like what he did in the postseason in 2024. That's the question. Will Howard played the best football of his career in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. We can say whatever we want about Marcel Reed, and I don't disagree with anybody saying, but you also can't discount the fact that maybe he gets hot in the postseason the way that Max Duggan did at Texas or at TCU a couple years ago against Michigan, or the way that Will Howard got hot last year in the postseason. Who knows? But I think those teams they answer a couple questions and they become contenders, whereas Iowa doesn't have the personnel to become that team. I don't think USC has the personnel to jump into that mix. Even if Bryce Underwood becomes Superman, they're a playoff team. They're not a title contender. It's just getting to the playoffs doesn't make you a title contender. You've got to have other things going for it. So that's where I'm at the Big Ten and the SEC.
The conversation for the next two conferences, Brian, is pretty straightforward. I think that there's one clear-cut title contender out of the ACC, and that's Miami. I think they're the class, and then there is a sizable gap between the next title contender in the ACC compared to Miami, because it's all things that we really, really need to see working out. Could SMU potentially questions about replacing all four starting defensive linemen with transfer portal players? And I also don't know if Kevin Jennings is going to be the guy to lead them to a championship. Because the last time he was on this big stage, obviously did not go well. Hopefully he learns lessons from that the next time they do get on that big stage. But I also don't know if that means he's now a championship caliber quarterback. There's a lot that I have to see there. A lot I have to see from Clemson. With Jeff Brom and Louisville, it's like, okay, you start to question, do you have the overall pieces to be a championship contender? And can you just avoid that just head-scratching stupid loss or losses that you get? So I think Miami's the class of the ACC. I don't know if there's another team that's close in title contention there. You could talk about SMU, Clemson, but I think you got some teams that are far away.
I think SMU, I think Louisville, and I think Clemson are all teams capable of becoming a playoff team next year.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. And based on how our rankings are right now, we would have two ACC teams in the playoffs. Because the 12 team would get knocked out. So that would be, who was our 12, Trev? Our number 12 team was LSU. So we'd have LSU as the first team out. G5 team would replace them, and SMU's in the playoffs. And they would be playing Miami in the first round, a team that they beat last year. So SMU's a team capable of getting into the playoffs and maybe even winning a game, depending on the matchup. Same with Louisville. But they're not teams that are going to go on a 4-game run if they get in. And that's why I say being a playoff team doesn't make you a title contender. In theory, if you get in, you have a chance. Okay, well, if I'm going to buy that, then you also then have to say you thought that James Madison and Tulane had a chance to win it last year because they got in. So if the theory is if you get in, you got a chance. I think that Louisville right now, Louisville and SMU are closer to their chances of winning it all to what I would say Tulane was last year than what they would be to Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Texas, teams like that. But here's the thing. A run like that, if they're able to do it, which could mean a semifinal game, Trev, it could mean that you get the right draw like Penn State had a couple years ago, and things go really well for you. And that could be the thing that opens up the recruiting opportunities for you then to go get a roster that's capable of making a deeper run in the future. But the 26 teams, to me, there's 3 teams, maybe 4. Virginia's got a shot to be a playoff team. Their schedule is such that they could win the ACC this year, just like last year. Louisville's that way. Clemson's that way. But when you talk about, okay, could they do damage when they get in? Not more than 1 game, in my opinion. So they're not title contenders. Miami is a legitimate title contender next season.
Absolutely.
Now, I would argue of the teams on this list, Miami has the most question marks because Miami's the one team that I think has question marks on both sides of their line. Still. Like, as of today, still some question marks relative to the teams on this list. And that's why we had Miami 6. But I think Miami's a team that absolutely has the talent that if they answer those questions to the affirmative, will not only be dangerous for Notre Dame on November 7th, but it'll be dangerous in the postseason. And that's why I think that Miami absolutely belongs on that. Because you're not a title contender just because you made it to the title game a year before. Nobody went into the 23 seasons thinking, boy, TCU is a team that could win it all this year. That was a fluky season. That was luck. What Indiana did last year was not luck. And let's be real, TCU in a 12-team playoff is not getting to the title game. That 22 TCU team, if there's a 12-team playoff, is not making it to the national championship game. Just not going to happen. So I think there's one team that's the cream of the crop in the ACC. Now Miami has to prove that they can be that in the regular season as well.
Yep.
They showed they can be that in the postseason last year, Trev. Now they need to show that they can be that in the regular season. Because I don't know that 10-2 with 2 bad losses gets them into the playoffs this year. With how we think the season is going to go. And some of the 10-2, 9-3 records that some of these SEC teams are going to be putting up, and a couple Big Ten teams are going to have 10-2 records where you're like, with all due respect, your resume, Miami, you lost to Notre Dame on the road and you dropped the game to Clemson. With all due respect, you don't have any good wins. This team has 3 losses at 9-3. They got 4 top 15 wins. Like, there's some SEC schedules that could produce 9-3 teams with 4 top 20 wins. So the margin for error is going to be thinner in that, in my opinion, that 8-12 range for getting in. But if Miami plays their potential, they're a no-brainer playoff team next year, and they're a dangerous football team once they get there. Here's my thought on Miami, Trev. They're either going to go into the postseason with a legitimate shot to win it all, or they won't be in the postseason at all. Because they'll still stub their toe twice in conference and then also get beat by Notre Dame, and they're not in.
Yep.
If they're in, they're going to be dangerous. If they don't live up to expectations, they won't get in at all. That's kind of how I feel about Miami. Right now, I think they're a team that's a legitimate contender. But there's a reason why there's not a big gap there's a bigger gap between Georgia and Miami than anybody else on this list and the teams around them. There's only a 150-point gap, plus gap for Notre Dame and Ohio State. Then it's 50, 50, 50, 50, and then 300. And I think there's a reason for that.
Yeah, agreed completely. I'm with you on Miami. And then for the Big 12, I know we put BYU in our top 10. I don't think that they're a national title contender this year. And look, some people may disagree with this. I don't think Texas Tech was a national title contender last year. And they went 11-1 in the regular season, beat the brakes out of BYU in the Big 12 Conference Championship game. But going into the playoff field, they were not a team that I considered to be. Then obviously with the news to Brennan Sorsby, I think that kind of emphasizes the point. But I just don't think that there's a title contender in the Big 12.
I don't remember specifically what I said, Trev. I think I had a feeling that Texas Tech was a team that could maybe go on a run in the playoffs going in. I might have been. Because I just watched how they dismantled that conference. But then once you saw them on that stage and you realize, like, this is a loaded Texas Tech team that just steamrolled their league, and they got manhandled by Oregon on both sides of the ball. And you realize, yeah, they're not that. And I don't think this Texas Tech team, even with Brennan Sorsby, is as good as last year's Texas Tech team. At some spots they are. Oh, they got Ben Roberts. Yeah, last year they had Ben Roberts and Jacob Rodriguez and Lee Hunter and Romello Height and David Bailey, and Cole Wisniewski. And they still couldn't got beat by more than 3 touchdowns by Oregon, who a week later got beat by 34. So there's nobody in the Big 12. There's 5-6 teams that have a legitimate shot at getting into the playoffs, Trev. I think this is going to be a more competitive year in the Big 12. That's where Brendan Sorsby's potential suspension could make the Big 12 interesting, is I don't think Texas Tech steamrolls it this year like they did last year because of that.
Sure.
But whoever does get in is at best a one-win team. At best. Are there teams capable of getting in the right matchup, winning a game? I think so.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we watched Arizona State get in 2024 as an afterthought, and they took Texas to overtime, a team that played in the semifinals. Capable of winning a game? Absolutely, especially given the right draw.
Yeah. I mean, Texas Tech could, BYU could, Houston could, and Arizona State could, just off the top of my head. Could all get in and get the right, they're the 9 and they play an 8, or they're the 10 and they play a 7, even a 6 and 11, depending on who they get matched up against. I could see them, let's say that one of those teams gets in and there's an overrated SEC team at 7, and they're at 10. Like, okay, don't sleep on Houston in this game against Alabama. You know what I mean? Like, don't sleep on Arizona State being able to beat this mediocre Alabama team that once again was overhyped getting into the postseason. You know what I mean? Like, but then the next round they get exposed as like, okay, they're a good team, but there's a different level with these top teams. And I actually think that's why I think the quarterfinals this year could be extremely epic, depending on the first round matchups. There could also be some ugly games in the quarterfinals because of that. But this is because of what we're talking about, Trev. I think we're going to see more really good second round games this year than we've seen in the past, because the quarterfinals have been not competitive games last 2 years. I think really you had the Georgia Ole Miss game this year. And I would argue Georgia Notre Dame the year before was competitive. Texas Arizona State was competitive simply because Texas just took their foot off the gas after going up 17-0. Let Arizona State back in. They should have put them away. And then the Notre Dame Georgia game was competitive for about 55 minutes of a 60-minute game, but the 5 minutes where it wasn't competitive made it to where the second half wasn't actually competitive in winning and losing, even though like the play of the two teams in the second half was competitive. Notre Dame did some things, Georgia did some things, but the game was never in doubt because of that 2 minutes at the end of the first half and third quarter, second half. So I just don't see anybody in the Big 12 as being that. I think there's these 7 teams, and I could see one of Oklahoma or A&M jumping into that mix. I could see it going to 8 this year, but I think it's interesting that FanDuel has it this way. These are also our top 7 teams, and we pulled this up after we did our ranking. Now, obviously, they have it in a little bit different order than we have it, but I just think it's very clear who the top set. Who's the next one after Miami, Trev? You had the whole ranking up. Who was the next team after Miami? So obviously, it was Texas Tech, Texas A&M. Okay.
And then LSU, and then Texas Tech, and then Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma.
Interesting. Very interesting. I'd put Oklahoma a little higher on that list, personally. But I also think that Oklahoma has some things to prove. But A&M's a team that, if they could figure some things out in the trenches, could be a team that does some damage next year, because they got their playoff thing out of their way. They got the experience. They lost and all this other kind of stuff, but they got that experience, so it should be good for them this year. So, but I still think right now there's clear separation between the 7, and I don't know that I would have. Obviously, we don't have the ranking the same, Trev. We would have Miami ahead of Georgia and Oregon above Indiana most likely, and things like that. But this is our 7. This is our teams, the 7 teams that you and I view as the without a doubt the most legitimate title teams.
100%.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Very interesting. So this goes back to the point we're making earlier too, Trev, is us having Notre Dame number 1 is not just about a couple Notre Dame guys doing a Notre Dame show overhyping their football team. There's a lot of outside sources and entities that view Notre Dame the same way. A lot.
Brian, to take us home here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We got a daily mailbag coming everybody's way. And this one is like it was yesterday, going to be themed. We just got done breaking down our post-spring top 25, and we talked about title contenders. So we want this mailbag to be geared more towards national topics. I mean, super chats will always get answered, but it's one of those where, ideally we're answering questions about what our rankings were, where you guys would have people, who you guys believe title contenders are, not necessarily about, what we need to see from the tight end room over summer and fall camp for them to be an effective unit. There will be time for that conversation. Believe me, the bulk of the offseason is ahead of us, but that's how we're diving into the mailbag today, man. Now, if this does happen to be your first one, and we have new listeners every single day here on the show, you can put MB for mailbag or a little mailbox emoji before your submission lets us know to set that question aside.
Trev, we did have a super chat, and again, you can ask Notre Dame questions, but do it more in like related to bigger picture things in college football. But we did have a super chat from our guy Howard Eustache. Over under on the Notre Dame defense only allowing 13 points per game next year. So let's say that we set it at 13.5. Trev, what would you take?
Well, I guess the clarity for me is like, are we talking how many games, or are we talking about over under? Like, are we taking the over under at 13?
Per game?
Okay,
per game. So like on the season, looking back at the stats and all that kind of stuff.
I would probably go. I'm probably going to take the over. I think Notre Dame will allow slightly above 13 points per game next year, just because of the level of the offenses that they're going to play. I don't know if they're going to hold Miami's offense to that. I don't know if they're going to hold BYU's or SMU's offense to that. Now, that's not an indication of what the spread or the final score will be. Just because I think Notre Dame allows more than 13 points per game against Miami or 13 points against Miami, I don't think that means they lose 14-10. You know what I'm saying? So I'll take the over slightly. I could see him allowing like 14 points per game. Factor in like Navy will probably be around that 13-point mark. It wouldn't surprise me if in week one, with a different style of offense and a mobile quarterback, Wisconsin scores around 13 to 16 points. None of those would surprise me. So I'll take the over, but just slightly.
I think the defense will be better than it was last year, Trev. It was at 17.6 points per game last year. And if you take away the first 3 games, the next 9, and that includes ranked opponents in USC, Navy, and Pitt. It also includes an Arkansas team that consistently scored a lot of points against other SEC teams. If you actually go look last year, Trev, Arkansas averaged 30 points a game in SEC play last year. And if you look at their scoring offense on the entire season, Arkansas was at 32.9 points per game. Notre Dame held them to 13. Like, that was a team they played during that stretch. USC was the team they played during that stretch. And they gave up 12.6 in the last 9 games. But you just can't ignore the fact that the 2 best teams they played were in that first stretch. So let's just say, hypothetically, Trev, that Notre Dame in the first 2 games. So after the first 2 games, Notre Dame gave up 14.3 points per game. So let's just say that Miami gets held to 20 and A&M gets held to 24. Way better than what they did. That's still 15.6 points per game. Okay, so all right, well let's go one further. So let's say that that Notre Dame last year. So let's take the Miami points away. Let's take the A&M points away and the Purdue points a game. So let's say that Notre Dame gives up 20 to Miami, 24 to A&M, and only 14 to Purdue. That in 12 games is still 14.3 points per game. Like, that's pretty good because of who they're going to play. And that would rank Notre Dame next year 14.3. That would rank them 5th in the country. That's still pretty good. So, yeah, I'd take the over, but I think they're going to be a whole lot closer to that this year than they were last year.
Yeah.
So good question. We have a super chat from Tristan, cosine Chandit. Don't have a question. Great show and great community. Love IB. Thank you very much for that, Tristan, excuse me. Appreciate that very, very much. Got one up here, Trev, from Salty Virginia Peanuts.
Although some say that a dead cat can recruit to Florida State due to the name, the head coach's hot seat seems to be a problem. Can they get into the top 25?
That sentiment has not been true since the arrival of NIL, because once NIL arrived, it wasn't about you're a traditional great program. Notre Dame is getting great players because of being Notre Dame, but they have to at least be competitive in the NIL sphere. As I said, like there were like it's funny listening to a buddy who sent me some messages from Penn State fans how they're just constantly crying about how Notre Dame's buying players because they keep beating Penn State for recruits. And I wanted to say I'm like 100% confident that at least 2 of the 3 big name kids that Notre Dame beat Penn State for last year, Penn State offered more money. It's just but the reality is that it's the combination of the education, all the different things, and the NIL money that makes them want to go there. Well, right now, Florida State doesn't have a ton of money to spend, and the tradition doesn't mean anything. I mean, Florida State won a title in 2013, right, Trev? That's way more recent than Notre Dame's last title. But think about if you're a senior in high school right now. You're 18 years old. The last time Florida State won a title, you were 5 or 6 years old. Like, it doesn't register. They more recently, they've seen you go 2-10 than they've seen you be a title contender. They saw you in your best season go to the bowl games and get beat by 60. So it just doesn't sell. That was a legitimate sentiment 20 years ago. That doesn't mean a hill of beans anymore because of NIL. You can't just win because of who you are. It has to be who you are plus a willingness to be at least competitive in the NIL sphere in order to win. But could they get into the top 25? Yes, they could. There's enough talent there, Trevor, that they could be a top 25 team this year in the ACC. I'm just not betting on it because of how disappointing and bad they've been. But you can't tell me, at least you can actually if you want to, but I'm going to have a hard time accepting that an ACC team with that roster can't crack the top 25. I just think they're capable of it. It's just there's no way in heck I would, in any way, shape, form, or fashion, put my reputation on betting that they're going to do that. I'd need to see it. I'm pulling the ultimate Trevor Trowbridge move right now. I got to see it, and I got to see it for 12 games. I won't buy it until the end of the year that they can be a top 25 team, meaning staying in it. They jumped into the top 25 last year. How'd that work out? I mean, a team that does that to Alabama one week is capable of being good. It's just they can't do it week after week after week.
Yeah, I'm based on the talent on the roster, could they? Maybe. But I think their head coach right now is getting them to be a top 50 program, let alone a top 25 program.
Yep.
I have zero faith in Mike Norvell. Literally zero. So my answer overarching would be no. Talent-wise, sure. If they had arguably any other coach in the ACC running that program, could they get into the top 25 at some point? Maybe. But the problems are much more foundational for Florida State right now than I think of just what's the level of talent on their roster. So it's not good down in Tallahassee.
My point was simply, Trev, that I think there's enough talent on the roster that they could ACC their way into the back end of the top 25, even with not a very good coach. Like it's in spite of him because of the schedule they play and different things like that. But again, I don't predict that. It's just because you do got to play Miami. You do got to play at least a couple good teams. And, I don't see any, like they could go out there next year and beat Miami just like they beat Bama. And then the next week lose to Stanford by 10. That's who Florida State is, and it's maddening. They could go beat Miami and then lose their next 5 games. Like, would that shock you, Trevor? If they did that,
Florida State beat Miami
and then lost their next 5. I mean, they did that. They beat Alabama last year by 2 touchdowns. It would not shock me if they just for 1 week figure it out and Miami has their we didn't show up moment. Part of this is also Miami doing what Miami has done the last 2 years. Florida State's back, baby. And then they lose their next 5. Wouldn't shock me at all.
It would shock me. I got to be honest. I think Miami this year is a much better team than what Alabama was last year. Nor is Florida State on the level of the teams that upset Miami last year. They're not SMU. They're not.
Well, maybe. Talent level, I would disagree with that. Coaching-wise, I would certainly agree with that. Let's go to Chris Black Irish 864, are you comfortable with Notre Dame being ranked 6th in the ESPN rankings?
Yeah, I mean, ESPN, the AP poll, the coaches poll, it's always going to differ from where we have Notre Dame ranked, and I get it. We even said before, we had a couple of questions, gosh, could have been a BISO holder or Mailbag a couple of weeks ago, where we thought Notre Dame was going to be ranked preseason. We said probably somewhere in between 4 and 6.
Closer to 6th than number 1.
Yeah. 100%. Like there's, in my mind, there's virtually a 0% chance that the voters will rank Notre Dame as the number 1 returning team in college football this upcoming year. That's going to go to Ohio State. I'm just preparing people. And it wouldn't shock me. Okay. And I get it.
That's okay.
100%. But yeah, I'm comfortable with it.
We will not do a show talking about the travesty of Notre Dame not being ranked number 1 if they're not ranked number 1. I'd be more surprised if they were than if they weren't. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Holy crap. They rank Notre Dame number 1. Like, that is shocking. And that's all. And I get it. Notre Dame has to prove that they belong on that spot. My only thing was, I can live with Ohio State being ranked number 1. I can live with Indiana being ranked number 1. I can live with Georgia being ranked number 1. What I will not tolerate is if they have Texas or Oregon ranked number 1. That's what I won't tolerate. That's when I'm like, okay, that's bullcrap. That's, but those other 3, no problem with that. None.
From Juan Delgado, which of the contenders would you say is a tougher matchup for Notre Dame as of right now?
That's a really good question. Because here's what to me is going to make you a tough matchup for Notre Dame. You have 2 lines good enough to go toe-to-toe with Notre Dame's lines. You have offensive skill good enough to make plays against Notre Dame's really good skill. And you have a quarterback that can hurt you with his legs.
Yeah, I got my answer.
And that's kind of why I say I think that's what you need to have. Ohio State had that 2 years ago. That's why they could do things against Notre Dame defense that everybody else could. They could at the very least tie Notre Dame in the trenches. And I would argue Notre Dame, got outplayed in the trenches, but they at the very least could go toe-to-toe, but then they had better – they could make more plays on the perimeter with Emeka Buka and Jeremiah Smith. And then the couple times Notre Dame had those guys covered, he just took off and made plays. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think right now the contender that would give Notre Dame the toughest matchup in comparison to the field of the 7 teams that we talked about, my argument would be for Oregon. Now, I think Notre Dame has the best returning secondary in college football, but we saw last year how they're used limits their effectiveness. I would be very concerned of watching them play a soft passive zone against that receiving core with a guy with top end speed like Evan Stewart, a guy that's sure-handed like DeCorian Moore. And I think amongst the quarterbacks, Dante Moore as a quarterback would give them more problems than Julian Sain, than Josh Hoover, than Darian Mensah. Like that matchup would concern me. And then Oregon in the trenches on defense, I think those 2 edge players could give Notre Dame's young tackles some issues from time to time. It would be significantly closer battle than what Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner versus Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor were last year. I don't think it would look like that. Yeah, I'd be shocked if Notre Dame ever has an offensive tackle performance that looks like that ever again. Nor do I hope
and
that
if they have one in the postseason, then it's time for someone else to be coaching that group up.
Agreed.
I'll just say it.
100%. But looking at those teams as a whole, I would probably say Oregon right now would probably be the toughest matchup amongst the contenders. Yeah.
It's Texas for me. And where you and I disagree, Trev, shouldn't disagree. What the differentiator between those 2 teams for us is, number 1, I think Arch is more dangerous as a runner than Dante is. I think as good as Oregon's receiving core is, I think Texas is actually a tougher matchup because I worry about the big, tall, long, fast guy giving Notre Dame problems more than the short, shiftier guy based on history. So like Cam Coleman concerns me a little bit more than DeCorian Moore or Evan Stewart based on history. Because Malachi Toney is more the exception. I think they would defend Miami very differently based on what we saw them do against USC if they had that rematch again. And I think Arch is a more dynamic runner. We saw that last year. The other one is I have more faith right now in Oregon's offensive line than I do, Texas's offensive line than I do Oregon's. And while I agree with you that Texas or Oregon has a better defensive line, I have the same concerns about Texas with Colin Simmons and Lance Jackson on the edge against the young tackles that you do.
Sure.
So I think Notre Dame can – I think where Oregon has the edge over Texas is inside. That's where Oregon would be even tougher than Texas. But the combination of I'm more concerned about the Texas offensive line and skill talent than I am Oregon's. And when it comes to the mobility factor, I'm more concerned about Arch. Where Dante would concern me if he just gets hot and he's just throwing dimes and you're in the perfect coverage and it doesn't matter. But I feel like CJ could match that against the Oregon secondary. The difference is if it comes down to who both defensive lines are getting pressure on the quarterback, I think Arch has a better chance of getting out of that and making plays than CJ or Dante.
Sure.
And that's where that one separates a little bit for me. But I would argue that those are the top two, in my opinion. So I think that's where and I don't even know, I don't even know that I disagree with you on Oregon. I think it's more that I'm a little higher on the Texas O-line maybe than you are at this point in time. I think that's really the separator is that part right there. Chris also says, should Clemson be ranked in the top 25 early rankings? Obviously, this came up before we started, but I do want to talk about Clemson, Trevor, because I think that's probably the most controversial top 25 ranking that we had. This is a team that went 7-6 last year. I think our thought process is that was a fluky 7-6 more than anything else. And I just think that this Clemson team with the schedule they're going to have this year, I just think they're going to be better than people think. And I know Trev agrees with me. I think that team underachieved last year. Dabo's got them right where they want them. They don't respect you. They don't do this. Dabo's back on the Roy bus, and that's where he's most comfortable.
Yeah, man. I mean, so Chris, definitely understand the concern. What you have to think about, not you specifically, but when people listen to these ranking shows, we have to rank teams in groups. When we talk about a team like Clemson, we don't talk about where they should be ranked relative to Notre Dame. It's in groupings. There's also a reason why we talked about our rankings, especially outside of the top 25, in groups of 5. And so when Clemson came in at the end of our top 25, we look at it compared to teams like Ole Miss, or teams like a Penn State, or teams like, Brian brought up South Carolina being a difficult team for him not to rank. I talked about Virginia Tech. And so when you start comparing them in that frame, because it's who makes it in at the end, it's not, all right, where should Clemson be ranked compared to Ohio State? And it's like, okay, well, nowhere near close. So then you start diving into who Clemson is as a team. Who would you guys trust more? Dabo Swinney, James Franklin at a new place, Shane Beamer, you know what I mean? And so it's like, okay, that side leans towards Dabo. Whose culture of a football program am I willing to trust more? James Franklin at a new place, Pete Golding, who we're not confident in as the head coach. We saw what he is in games with a roster that Lane Kiffin put together. But when it's his team, I think that's a relative unknown. I know how Dabo's able to build a team. So some of that separated it. You could debate it, because at the end of the day, some of our rankings are subjective. It's what we believe. So, should, maybe. But I think compared to the other teams that we looked at that we held out of the rankings, and compared to some of the other teams that we had in the back end of our top 25, yeah, I think Clemson should have been ranked.
Don't be shocked if Clemson ends up being better on the offensive line this year than they were last year. Because I think last year they had a big, stiff, physical offensive line that couldn't move. I think the one thing that I look at this offensive line this year, they're not as big, but they're going to be more athletic.
Sure.
And I think that better suits what they're trying to do. They didn't have an offensive line stylistically that matched what they were trying to do. And I think Garrett Riley was way worse.
Oh, they didn't have an offensive coordinator that understood the personnel that they had.
Nor did he know how to use it. I think we realized that Sonny Dykes was the brains behind the success at TCU.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Jake Spivatal was this boy wonder, and then they realized, he wasn't really the reason that they were good. Yeah. Got a super chat, big one from Drew, UT Irish. Thank you very, very much for this, man. I appreciate this very much.
Appreciate the super chat, man. As part of the national picture, what team on our schedule do you believe, besides Miami, is going to give Notre Dame the hardest problems? I think a lot of us Notre Dame fans underestimate how difficult that game is going to be in Provo this year.
It's going to be a tough game. BYU is going to be a physical football team. They are. And I could be completely wrong about this, Trevor, but I'm just not worried about Notre Dame losing that game. Because I think to beat Notre Dame now, you can't just go toe-to-toe with them in the trenches. You need to have playmakers that can beat them. And I just don't think BYU has that. That's why I think SMU, in my opinion, honestly has a better shot at upsetting Notre Dame than what BYU does. Obviously, Trev and I both think BYU is a better team, and we both have them ranked ahead, and it's on the road. But football, when you actually get down to who's going to win or lose, is not about who's ranked higher. It's about matchups. And a team that is not overly athletic but's big and physical just doesn't concern me as much. Here's the reality. If Miami beat Notre Dame in the trenches just as bad as they did last year, but they had this year's BYU receiving corps, Notre Dame still wins. Because they would have been able to cover all those receivers. There's no Malachi Toney that would have been the difference in a 3-point loss. And Notre Dame would have made some better plays on the perimeter going against not Miami's defense. And so that's why it'll be a tough game, Trev. I just don't think BYU is capable of beating Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame would have to beat themselves to lose that football game. It'd have to be like Texas Tech, Texas A&M, not Miami. Miami just beat Notre Dame. A&M, that was a fluky game that Notre Dame handed them, that just gift wrapped that game to them. SMU to me is similar. Notre Dame, they shouldn't beat Notre Dame. But I think they have more matchup advantages than what Notre Dame does. They have some receivers that can give DBs not named Leonard Moore some problems in certain matchups. BYU doesn't. And a team that wants to just go run the football, this isn't the defensive coordinator. Say whatever you want about Chris Ash and what he wants to do, but his style of defense is actually perfect to play to defend a BYU. It may not be to defend Miami and SMU, Georgia, Oregon, Texas, but it's built perfectly to stop BYU. And that's why they just matchup wise, they're the second best team on Notre Dame's schedule. They're not the second toughest matchup on Notre Dame's schedule, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with a whole lot of what you said. The other part for me, when I look at matchups, is the timing of when you play. Where SMU doesn't concern me is they will have already played BYU in Miami. Like, they will have been tested physically in the trenches by BYU, and they will be tested skill-wise against Miami. Because I think Miami has maybe not much, but I think they have a better receiving core top to bottom than what SMU has. I do. And so
Miami?
Yes, than SMU. And so it's just that's what concerns me. What's the test before Notre Dame plays SMU? It's Miami and BYU. What's the test before they play BYU on the road? Michigan State at home, Stanford at home, North Carolina on the road, Purdue on the road, Wisconsin up at Lambeau. So that's what concerns me overall. I'm not concerned about Notre Dame losing to either of those teams. But you're going out to a hostile environment. That will be a litmus test.
The altitude is the only thing that really concerns me about that being a road game, is you're going to be at a different elevation than what you're used to.
Different elevation.
That concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, different elevation. I think Provo's a difficult place to play. I mean, that will be a more difficult environment than Notre Dame on senior day against SMU.
Sure.
That's I think your concerns are very valid about SMU's ability skill-wise. I just think in comparison, Notre Dame will have more of a test from the skilled position standpoint going into the SMU game versus what they will environment-wise and in the trenches before they play BYU.
Don't disagree. My counter is Notre Dame's going to be a lot fresher when they play BYU and prepared to handle the trench warfare. Plus, there's a bye coming up. So you kind of have the whole let it all hang out thing. My concern, my counter to that is I also worry that if Notre Dame has already beaten Miami and BYU, is there a bit of a not taking SMU as seriously as they should with those athletes? But the point that Trevor and I flat out 100% agree on is the same statement he made and that I made. They shouldn't lose to either team. That's the key takeaway. There's one team on the schedule that's capable of beating Notre Dame. Now, what I don't mean is not winning the game. What I mean is beating Notre Dame, where Notre Dame didn't actually not play well. That team just outplayed them. There's only one, and that's Miami, that I think is capable of that. There's a world in which Notre Dame doesn't play like they did against A&M and still get beat by Miami. I'm not predicting it, but there's a world in which that happens. Notre Dame losing to SMU and BYU is going to require a letdown. I'm just more concerned about what SMU can do in a letdown game than BYU, because I just think BYU's entire philosophy plays right into Notre Dame's hands. And it's kind of like Texas Tech last year. Everything BYU wants to do just plays right into Texas Tech's hands. That's why they got slaughtered by them twice, because the matchup was terrible for them. Let's go to strikes for Irish. Strikers for Irish. Excuse me. My bad.
Who are your top 3 teams in each Power 4 and G5 and their odds to be in the title game?
So the G5, Trev, honestly, this is the hardest I've ever for me, it's ever been able to really evaluate the G5 because of how much teams lost. I'm not going to go through each conference and say, but here's a few teams that I think I have my eye on as G5 contenders, Trevor. And you, so as I'll name a team, Trevor, you tell me if you agree or disagree with it. And then if I miss somebody that you like, let me know. First one is Navy. I think Navy is a team that could legitimately be a play G5 contender for a playoff spot. They're one that I have my eye on. Agree or disagree?
Agreed.
Okay. The next one that I have on my list, Trevor, is Boise State. I do think this is going to be a Boise State team capable of being not as good as 2024, but better than last year, which might be good enough to get them in the postseason when you look at their schedule. Agree or disagree?
Agreed.
Okay. Here's my sleeper, and I'm finally going to get on Andrew Gilmore's good side. Here's my sleeper team for the G5, San Diego State, and what Sean Lewis is building over there. They're a sleeper team for me as possibly doing enough to get in to be that top-ranked team, because I think the new rule is you just have to be the top-ranked G5 team, not necessarily the conference title contender. I have to look more into that. But that's where I have that. That's another one. And then my other one, Trev, is UNLV with Dan Mullen. Now, I'm a little nervous about Jackson Arnold being their quarterback, but I just watched him win 10 games last year with Anthony Calandria. So, it's Dan Mullen. You know what I mean? UNLV is my other one. Those are the ones. James Madison with drawing a complete blank.
Bob Chesney?
No, they hired the guy Billy Napier is their new head coach.
Oh,
maybe, but I think they take a step back. They've lost a lot of portal players, and I don't know. I'm not sold on Billy Napier. He did a great job at Louisiana, but I'm not sold that he's going to be able to keep that thing going. We'll see. They lost a lot of really good players to the portal last year, Trev. So we'll see. But those are my top contenders. Agree, disagree? Who would you add?
Nobody. I was waiting for you to add in UNLV, and you mentioned them. So those are my odds to be in their conference title game. They're the front runners. If you're talking like national title game, it's a 0% chance that any G5 team probably ever will be in the title game.
The furthest a G5 team can go, in my opinion, in today's era is the semis. I think there's a world in which a team with a unique gimmick runs into an overrated Big Ten or SEC team in round one, and then something in round the quarters happens where they've got some gimmicky offense and the other team's dealing with like an injury, and that's the furthest they can go. The furthest they can go, in my opinion. They'll never go. And that's still, Trev, very unlikely. That's the furthest they'll ever go. Like if last year's BYU team, if 2024's BYU team or Boise State team, couldn't even compete, what? No.
That's the issue, unfortunately. Like that Boise State team with a Heisman, candidate runner-up loses by 2 touchdowns of arguably the lesser of the 4 semifinal teams.
Because here's my thing, Trevor. I think you'll agree with me on this. I'm going to say 2 things. Here's the first thing I'm going to say. The 2006 Boise State team could flat out legitimately go on at least a 2-game run, at least in the modern era. The 2009 Boise State team that beat Oregon by 11 and beat number 3 TCU in the Fiesta Bowl could legitimately be a semifinal team in today's college football. Agree? Disagree? Just briefly. If you could transport those teams to today. Here's the second part of that, though. There's 5% chance that those rosters will ever be accumulated at that level again. Because they're just going to get poached by the portal. That's the sad thing about the NIL, is that you can't build a team like what Chris Peterson built at Boise State anymore. Because there's no way those guys last that long. 5, 6, 7. I mean, some of them will stay. Ashton Genty stayed in the portal era. But there's no way all of them stay. Kellen Moore might have stayed, but 2 of the receivers would have bounced. That's the sad thing about, you're just not going to see that team stay together in today's game the way you used to, the way that the portal rules are now. And that's why you'll never see a team like that. You'll never see a team like UCF. Some of those teams, like with Frost and Heupel, those teams might have been able to win a couple games in the postseason. They're not title contenders. None of them are title contenders. 06 BYU Boise State's the only one that might have been a title contender in a bad year.
Yeah.
But UCF would have been no better than winning a game or 2. But they're not going to do that either anymore.
What those teams would need is like the perfect shot. And I hesitate to use this word because it sounds so harsh, but I just can't think of anything else. What you need are kind of like the P4 like burnouts, they really have to be intentional finding the guys that like out of high school, they were offered by like Oregon, Auburn, Oklahoma, Notre Dame. And then they just, were never able to crack the 2 deep and load up an entire roster full of like those guys. After, a couple years where it's like they bounce around, they go to like Louisiana, they go to Tulane. If one G5 team could put those together, I could see them making it to the semifinals. But even then, you start getting into like that next level of football because there's tiers to everything. A group, I mean, what we said about Indiana in 2024, they were a G5 all-star team, and they lost in the first round of the playoffs. And so that's where I hesitate. Now, Indiana went out and won the whole thing last year, so that's the counter to what my argument was. They also didn't have to play Notre Dame, a team that I think could have beat them, but that's hypothetical. So that's what you would need as a perfect storm.
But that G5 All-Star team had to go out and get a quarterback from Cal,
a center from Notre
Dame. You know what I mean? Like even then, like it was like, they still needed some of that power.
Yeah, 100%.
And one of their best players. I mean, two of their 3 receivers. They had a stud G5 receiver in Elijah Surratt, but their next 2 receivers were all Power 5 recruits. Omar Cooper was there when Cignetti got there, and Charlie Becker, I believe, was a high school recruit as well. So, and look, Kurt Cignetti's not going back to the G5 to get all of his portal guys. Exactly. You know what I mean? Like, he got JMU guys for the most part, an Old Dominion guy here or there. But, like, as he's gotten able to go out and get guys from K-State and TCU and Notre Dame and Michigan State, he's done that. And that should tell you a little bit of something. But, yeah, it's I don't love it, Trev, but that's just the reality. We won't see teams like 06, 09, Boise State ever again. In the current era, I should say. If the rules change, maybe it'll come back. But that's where we are now.
From Jay Melvin, with Sorsby potentially gone, do you think Will Hammond can lead Texas Tech back to a Big 12 title? And do you sympathize with their plight? I already know the answer to this, but I love snarky Brian.
No, I don't sympathize with their plight. I'll answer that part first because you went out and got a guy who broke a contract with another team and basically came to your school for one reason and one reason only, because you offered him the most money. And I'm shocked that he's a kid that doesn't necessarily make the smartest decisions financially off the field. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sympathetic to anyone with an addiction. And I've seen how, and I'm not someone who dismisses gambling as like, oh, there's no real thing. Gambling's not an addiction. There's not like, yeah, it is. Like, I think it is. And it's not because, like, it's a lot of things. Like, it can certainly become something that you can have a legitimate unhealthy addiction to. It doesn't just, I don't believe that addictions are just substance abuse addictions. I think there's different types. And I've seen it in my family. I've seen, an uncle that I absolutely adore and love. And I saw it just tear his family apart. I've seen it. But at the same time, it's kind of like it's not a substance where you're not in your right frame of mind. We're like, okay, I don't mind gambling on all of this, but you start betting on football games. Now it's like, now we got a problem. And I'm not super sympathetic to that. I hope the kid gets it figured out and gets it fixed. And I'm also not super sympathetic to a program that's just out there trying to buy the best roster the money can buy. Like when I think of Texas Tech, I think of that Nick Nolte rant in Blue Chips. There he is, the best roster the money can buy right there. Hair's happy, you know, like that's the rant that I think of. So no. And then when your coach goes out there and wants to run his yap all off season, it's like, yeah, you know what? I don't have a lot of sympathy for you about pretty much anything right now. So no, I don't sympathize with their plight. You know, like it is what it is. And that's a choice you made. You chose to bring him into your program, you know? So, that's kind of where you get. Do I think Will Hamlin is capable of leading them back to the Big 12 title game? Yes. To the Big 12 title game? Sure. Could they win it? Yeah, possibly. I think it's a much smaller margin for error now. Because I think the other thing too, Trev, is I think the Big 12 as a whole is going to be a little bit better this year than it was last year.
Yeah. Do I think Will Hammond can lead Texas Tech back? No, I don't think that he can put the team on his shoulders to lead them back to the Big 12 championship game. But I think he could be the starting quarterback.
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah. Like I think he could be the starter. I don't think if the team needs Will Hammond to be the guy to lead them to the Big 12 championship game, I don't think they make it back. But if they can rely on Cameron Dickey and Coy Eakin and some of the other players they have coming back, then yeah, I absolutely think that they can. The only people that
defense doesn't take a step back, if it's still as good as it was.
I don't think they are the clear-cut class of the Big 12 anymore. You know, and you could argue even with Brendan Sorsby coming in, you could argue that they weren't, but they probably still were. The only players that I sympathize, or the only thing that I sympathize with Texas Tech are the players. They didn't ask him to do that.
Sure.
Like I think of players like
they also didn't choose for him to come be their quarterback either.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, like they didn't have a players only meeting and say, "Hey guys, we need to talk to the donors to pool enough money to get Brendan Sorsby in here." You know, like I think of Cameron Dickey who came back. I think of Ben Roberts who came back. I think of some of the other portal players that elected to come to Texas Tech to play ball because they were at the time considered the class of the Big 12. So I sympathize with the players because that's not their fault. But yeah, I don't feel bad for Joey McGuire. Texas Tech is like a program. I'm sorry, bud.
No, I get it. There's two reasons why I don't think Texas Tech was going to dominate the league like they did last year. Number one is I don't think they're quite as good as they were last year, but they're still the best team. Yeah. But I also think that there's other teams that have elevated a little bit. And I think that's why it would have been a little bit more competitive than it was last year. Like this version of Arizona State is going to be better than last year's version of Arizona State. And last year's version of Arizona State beat Texas Tech without Behren Morton. Well, guess what? They're not going to have Behren Morton at all this year. Now they're probably not going to have Brendan Sorsby. So real quick. And then Sonny Burnett said, slow your roll, Brian. There's 260 viewers in here with an addiction, but this is a healthy one. This is like I have an addiction to, eating healthy food or prayer or something that's good for you. This is an uplifting thing. So it's very healthy. Very healthy. It's not like gambling where, it's going to be a problem. So that's one that I support.
From Black Irish, does elite quarterback play have any impact on the rankings of teams?
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Big time. The better your quarterback is, the better chance you have that we're going to feel confident you can reach your potential. The worse your quarterback play is, the more questions we're going to have about whether or not you can reach your potential as a team.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at what our top five was. I mean, our top five quarterback, like our top five teams, their starting quarterbacks were C.J. Carr, Arch Manning, Dante Moore, Josh Hoover, and Julian Sain.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Got one here from Timecone 57.
Is Michigan low rating Bryce Underwood disappointing?
I think I think what the question is their ranking based on him being disappointing? And my answer would be, yeah, for sure. If Bryce Underwood was every bit as good as what people thought he was coming out of high school, then I absolutely would be much more confident in Michigan's ranking this year. But I don't think he's anywhere close to that. So, yeah, for me, it absolutely does. Now, would they be a top 10 team if he was as good as we thought he was coming to high school? Probably not. But would they be in the top 15? Probably. For me, they would be. So, they're being ranked as low as they are absolutely plays a role. I mean, here's the thing, Trev. the quarterback is Jason Beck is the OC, correct? It's the name of the OC. Look what he did with Devin Dampier. What would he do with a legit five-star Bryce Underwood at quarterback? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they'd be a lot better team this year if he was what everybody thought he was going to be going into year 2. But he hasn't been, and I haven't seen any evidence this spring. And look, it's not just the spring game. I wasn't in love with things I was hearing from homers. Like Michigan's got homers that cover that team, like homers, and they weren't even like, "Hey, this is the five-star Bryce Underwood." Wait, and then he comes out in the spring game and looks like he did. It's like I haven't even heard that from them. So that absolutely impacts their ranking.
Yeah,
no question about it.
Definitely part of the evaluation.
Yep. Got one from Katsky.
Brian, do you think the AP will rank Notre Dame in the top 5? Who do you think the AP will rank top 5?
I think the top 5 will be Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, Texas, and probably Notre Dame. And then I debate whether it'll be Notre Dame or Indiana as in the top 5. I'm quite confident that they're going to look at Texas, Oregon, Georgia, and Ohio State as ahead of Notre Dame. Would I? No. Do I think the voters will? Yes. I think they'll at least have those 4 teams, and then it comes down to who's 5 or 6. Is it going to be Notre Dame, or is it going to be Miami, or is it going to be Indiana? I mean, there's a world in which Notre Dame is 7th, Trevor, as I kind of think through it. It's like the 4 teams we just talked about, plus Miami, plus Indiana, and then Notre Dame is 7. There's a world in which I can see that happening. And you know what? I'll say it's BS, but I'm not going to lose my mind about it because they have a shot to go out there and handle their business and prove them wrong. Because if you rank Notre Dame ahead of Miami and then Notre Dame goes and loses to Miami, who cares? If you rank Miami ahead of Notre Dame, but then Notre Dame goes and beats Miami, okay, fine. And then you move ahead of them, right? I mean, that's the way it'll play out. So I don't care. You know, well, I shouldn't say I don't care. I'll care because we'll talk about it. But I'm not going to lose my mind over it, most likely. Now, there's some other teams that they rank ahead of Notre Dame. I may have some words, but I think there's a lot of positive buzz about Notre Dame. I'd be a little surprised if they're 7.
Yeah, my guess in order, I bet they go Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Oregon, and then either Notre Dame or Indiana.
I'd probably flip Georgia and Oregon just because of the whole Texas can't beat them. It would be my guess, but I'm with you on that, Trev.
From Jay Melvin, what do you not like about Mike Bobo's scheme, Brian? A lot of Georgia fans don't care for him, but what is it? And do you like their DC Glenn Schumann?
So a couple things about Mike Bobo's scheme. Number one is I don't think it allows them to be physical. I think even like their run game is a little bit kind of slow developing. It just doesn't allow them to come off and just fire off the ball and play physical football. I think his pass game relies too much on trying to be cute than dropping back, letting your athletes get down the field and make plays. He's in this world of, I think I'm, 1999 Rich Rod at Clemson with all the quick game and stuff that we're throwing. And then I'm going to design this deep shot as opposed to aggressively going on the attack. If you have speed, you can shut this Georgia offense down if you have any kind of speed. And it's very unoriginal. Even the trick stuff they do is largely like, okay, good teams don't fall for it. They succeed because he will, against a poorly coached defense like Ole Miss, he'll design some of those shots will hit. Like he hit one against Notre Dame. He could have hit 2 on a blown coverage early in the game, but even then they got points on the one that the one that they blew, I believe, the one they had the deep drop ball. Didn't that happen on the series that they also caught the second big play for the touchdown? I believe it happened on the same series. So it's not even like you could look back. I think it was like Dylan Bell dropped the deep. You can't even look back and be like, man, if they would have hit this and that, it would have been a different game because they happened on the same series. And then after that, it was very unoriginal. It's just he relies too much on trying to be cute as opposed to going on the attack. Like Todd Monken was very creative, but everything he was doing was aggressive. There was purpose to it. It was, I'm setting you up with this to come to this, and I'm putting isolations where I'm going to get you matched up against this guy, and I'm going to use motions and shifts to make sure that you've got a linebacker defending Brock Bowers. and Oscar Delp's not Brock Bowers, but the lack of stuff to design for Oscar Delp was just like, dude, what are you doing?
That's my biggest gripe. One of my biggest gripes with that offense was underutilizing the tight ends. Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp were woefully underutilized last year in that offense. They combined for like 35 catches and like 3 touchdowns. Yeah, I'm with you on Mike Bobo. From Salty, was Oklahoma's poor offense late last season due to the quarterback being hampered by injury, or do the problems run deeper?
I think it was primarily injury. I do. I think it's a big part of it. I mean, you go look at his numbers before the injury, and they played Auburn and Michigan. He was a much different quarterback. Like, much different quarterback. Now, I mean, some of it is like, okay, they figured out the scheme and they made a job. I get all that. There's always some of that. But then Oklahoma would counter. You couldn't throw the football. The ball looked different coming out of his hand in the second half of the year than it did before the injury. It just did. 100%. It just looked different. John Mateer was never a guy that was going to go out there and look like CJ Carr as a passer or Dante Moore's passer. He was never that guy. I think one of the games he played against a Power 4 team the year before, he went like 9 of 19 or something, but then ran for $140. But even then, he wasn't the runner he was because he had to protect his hand. So it greatly impacted his level of play. Like, look, listen, John Mateer was never like the Heisman contender that people made him out to be, but he's a much better quarterback than what we saw most of last year, in my opinion. But he's the kind of kid that you can't afford to have that kind of injury if you're John Mateer, because it just debilitates your entire game. So I just think that he's a better quarterback than what he showed last year. I think 95% of it was, I'd say 75% of it was the physical injury. 25% of it was the mental dealing with having to protect against that injury. So, and what that means is like 75%, it's you can't throw the same way physically because of that. The 25% mental means is he's constantly having to protect that hand as opposed to just letting it play out, let it all hang out. Now, and Archer makes a good point in the chat. Like, there's a conversation to be had is, can his playing style make it through a whole season in the SEC? That's a fair conversation, but that's where you got to be smart if you're the OC. Hey, listen, man, we're playing this team. We don't need him to be that guy in this game. And, like, I thought Mike Denbrock was pretty smart about that at times. Like, yeah, we're not going to, have Riley carry the ball. Like, they didn't go out against Penn State the same way they did against Ohio State in the first series. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a reason for that. But I think that's a big part of it.
Agreed. Another one from Salty. Can Alabama stake a strong claim to a top 25 position without having a potent run game?
Yes. They did that last year. Should they have been in the playoffs? Absolutely not. Should they have been a top 25 team? Absolutely. I mean, they beat Georgia. They beat Oklahoma in the postseason. Like, they're not a terrible team. They just had no business being in the playoffs.
Agreed.
And I don't think they're going to be any worse running the ball this year than they were last year, because at least, I just don't see it. Top 25 team, yes. Playoff team, absolutely not.
Agreed. From Jay Melvin, my title contenders are Notre Dame, Indiana, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, Texas, and Oregon. How does Notre Dame stack up to all these teams? Who do they match up well with, and who do you think would be more of a challenge in this list?
Well, we've talked about Texas and Oregon. So we talked about that. We talked about where they might give Notre Dame problems. I think there's obviously areas where Notre Dame can give them problems as well. But with Miami, I'm going to hold off Miami till the next question, Trev, because the final question is one about Notre Dame and Miami. So let's talk about the others, Notre Dame and Ohio State. Obviously, the danger that Ohio State presents is they have 2 tall receivers on the outside that are fast and talented, and that can give you some problems when you talk about Jeremiah Smith. And then, of course, by the time Notre Dame would play Ohio State, we're talking game 13, 14, or 15, or 16 of Chris Henry's career. He's not going to be a rookie like he'll be in September. They present some matchups there. I think this is also a better offensive line, potentially, than what Ohio State had 2 years ago. Now, Notre Dame's defensive line should be a lot better than it was 2 years ago when they didn't have Boubacar or Riley Mills or 50% of Howard Cross, and they didn't have Jason Onye or Jordan Pataho and all that. But this is going to be a better Ohio State offensive line. in my opinion. So I think the Ohio State offense could potentially give Notre Dame some issues from a skilled standpoint. I can't speak to the schematic matchup yet because I need to see what Arthur Smith is going to do. But talent-wise, I think they present some problems. And I think we're going to see Julian Sain using his legs more this year than we saw last year. He's capable of it. Go watch him in high school. And they've talked about we want to get more of that out of him, which they need to do. Defensively, I don't think Ohio State presents the problems that they have in the past. I think this Notre Dame offensive line can beat Ohio State in the trenches. Now, Ohio State does have some skill players on defense that can cover Notre Dame's receivers. There's no question. But I also think that Notre Dame's receivers can make plays against Ohio State secondary. It's the same argument on the other side. Well, I mean, I don't know that this secondary is going to be that much better than the one in 2024. And I watched Jaden Greathouse make plays against Jermaine Matthews, who's one of their corners, right? And then I saw him make plays against Caleb Downs. So, yeah, I think Notre Dame's guys can make plays against them. But then also Ohio State's secondary can also make plays against Notre Dame's offense. That's what good teams do. But I don't think they're going to be able to shut down Notre Dame's run game like they did 2 years ago, partly because hopefully Notre Dame doesn't have the missed opportunities that they had in the run game this year like they had 2 years ago, which we've broken down on our board. There was 2 run plays in particular where if the offensive lineman makes the right read, that's gone. And you can't miss those. And against a team like Ohio State, you can't miss those opportunities. When Ohio State had those opportunities, they didn't miss. And so I think that's where this game is this matchup is a little bit different than what it was a couple years ago. I also wondered, do they have the slot player that can give Notre Dame problems like a Mecca did 2 years ago? Outside, yeah, that's an issue, but Notre Dame can take one of those guys, limit one of those guys out. I mean, what I would do is I'd put Leonard Moore on Chris Henry and then double Jeremiah Smith is what I would do. And, then say, hey, make Brandon Inniss beat you, make the run game beat you. That's what I would do. And that's pretty much what Texas did a couple years ago. And we'll, see if Notre Dame's capable of doing that. Indiana, again, it's the same thing. They're very well coached. They're good in the trenches, and they can hold up with you. I don't think that Indiana this year would beat Notre Dame. I think it would look a lot like it did 2 years ago. I think their 25 team would have given Notre Dame a little bit of a tougher matchup. I'm not as concerned about Josh Hoover's legs as much as I was about Fernando Mendoza's. And that's the matchup part that's not as big. And their receivers are similar to what they've had the last 2 years. And we saw Notre Dame secondary kind of shut their receivers down 2 years ago. And I think they would have some issues with Notre Dame's defensive line, just like they did 2 years ago. Like, I just think Notre Dame is still the more dynamic athletic team. And I think that this version of Notre Dame in the trenches would give Indiana a lot of problems. The question would be would Mike Shanahan be able to outduel Chris Ash? He couldn't do it to Al Golden. Could he do it to Chris Ash? That we don't know because we haven't seen Chris Ash on that stage. And then the final one for me is Georgia, and I think it would look – we've talked about this one. We had a question about this recently, Trev. It would look a lot like it did 2 years ago. I think Notre Dame would beat them in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and I think it'd be a hard-fought game, competitive game, but I think Notre Dame is just – they've got too many weapons on both sides of the ball. I think Georgia would struggle to throw on this Notre Dame team. I think this team overall is just more this defensive line would overwhelm their offensive line like it did 2 years ago.
Yeah, against Georgia, I could see the final score being the same, but how you come about those scores, I don't see being the same. Like, I don't see them having a kick return. I don't see it being like a last-second strip sack fumble. I just think that Notre Dame would put together drives where they physically dominate Georgia. Mm-hmm. I do. I think it would look more like that.
Yep. Then the last question, Trev, from Spencer Chalewski. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce that right. I probably didn't, but Spencer's last question is about Notre Dame and Miami. This is why I held off on the comparison of the last two, Trev.
How do the position rooms between Notre Dame and Miami compare preseason? I currently have Notre Dame with the advantage on offensive line, linebacker, and DB. And then the edge with Miami with wide receiver, running back, and D-line edge, and the quarterback and tight ends are a wash.
I'll give you tight ends are a wash. I think Notre Dame has better talent. I think Miami has more proven players. So I think that's a wash. And again, these comparisons are a little bit. I mean, the Notre Dame O-line isn't going against the Miami O-line, but we'll do it that way. Notre Dame certainly has the better offensive line. I think significantly so. I think Notre Dame has a better linebacker room. Miami's linebacker room is good, though. It's a good linebacker room. I just think Notre Dame is one of the best in the country. And same thing in the secondary. I think Miami has a top 10 secondary next year, no doubt. Yep. I think Notre Dame has the number 1 or 2 secondary in the country. So Notre Dame has the edge there, but Miami's no slouch in either of those. And I think the same thing is true on the other side. It would be the most homerish thing of me of the world of me to say Notre Dame's receivers are as good as Miami's, because they're not. Now, could they be? There's a chance, but right now Miami's is certainly better. You have a returning 2,000-yard receivers coming back. And Notre Dame doesn't have a guy like Notre Dame has 2 guys who have 1,000 yards like over the last couple of years. Actually only one, actually. So Miami certainly has the edge there. Now, talent-wise, I don't think there's a giant gap, but Miami has the edge, and then the experience is really where there's a difference. Running back, to me, Miami has the edge in experience. I don't think Notre Dame takes a back seat to them in talent. And I feel a lot like this room like I did 2 years ago. When we said, yeah, I know Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price haven't proven it, but this is a big-time running back room. I feel kind of the same way. Even maybe there isn't a Jeremiah Love in this group, this running back room won't take a back seat to many people. But you have to give Miami the edge in proven production, Trevor. I think you have to. The one that I would disagree with, there's 2 I would disagree with. Quarterback. I do not give Miami the edge in quarterback. I don't. I think C.J. Carr is a better player than Darian Mensah. I think Darian Mensah is a very good player, and I think he's a perfect fit for that system. And he'll probably throw for more yards than C.J. Carr, but yards don't equal better. That's why we don't think Drew Mestemaker is a top 10 NFL draft pick. But I think if you polled college teams and college coaches and NFL people, a large majority would say that C.J. Carr is a better quarterback than Darian Mensah. And Darian Mensah is who he is. He's a third-year starter. This is who he is. C.J. Carr is obviously going to continue to get better. The other disagreement I have is the D-line. I think Notre Dame fans still continue to underestimate how good the Notre Dame defensive line is. It was very good last year. Very good last year. Guys, you don't lead the nation in pressures from your D-line, and you don't hold teams to 100 yards or less in rushing when you play the teams that Notre Dame plays if you're not really good on the defensive line. Now, are they elite? Obviously not. But they were very good, and they're going to be more talented this year than they were last year. So I think this is a place where people continue to underestimate how good Notre Dame is. I would call the line a wash. I think you could argue that the starters are very comparable. You got Damon Wilson. Notre Dame has Boubacar Traore. You have Marquise Lightfoot. Notre Dame has Bryce Young. You have, your third end, whether it's Ahmed Moten, whoever you think, or not Ahmed Moten, Armando Blunt, whoever you think your third end is, maybe it's a kid from Nebraska, and Notre Dame has Keon Keeley and the freshman. We can just not even get into it and call it a wash. D tackle, same way. You got Justin Scott, Notre Dame has Tion Gray. You have Ahmed Moten, Notre Dame has Francis Brew. Here's the difference why I would say, if I even granted that Miami has a slight talent advantage in the starting lineup, which I don't agree with, I'm going to grant that premise. The biggest difference for me, Trevor, between the two is Notre Dame's depth is significantly better this year than Miami's. Last year, that wasn't true because Miami not only had better talent in the starting lineup, their depth was every bit as good, if not better, than Notre Dame's. It's a different story this year. And so this year, I don't think it's a wash. I think Notre Dame has the better line. But I'll even grant you that it's a wash. I won't argue with you if you want to say it's a wash. But I don't accept the fact that it's better because you're not talking about last year's lines. You're talking about this year's lines. And this year's lines, Notre Dame lost Jared Dawson, lost Gabriel Rubio, lost Junior Tuihalamaka, so you have 2 undrafted free agents and a guy that was taken in the 6th round. They added Tion Gray. They added Francis Brew. They added Keon Keeley. They added Elijah Golden. They added Rodney Dunham. And they added Ebenezer Utade. this is a much better D-line than it was last year, and last year's was pretty good. Were they as good as Miami's? Not even close. I think Miami, when they were on, had the best line in college football last year. Like, I've had a lot of beef with Ruben Bain as a regular season player. What he did in the playoffs last year was one of the best postseason performances I've seen in a playoff format from a defensive lineman ever. I mean, he was dominant. He had a season's worth of production in the postseason, Trevor. You know what I mean? Like, he was brilliant. But you don't have him anymore. You don't have Akeem Messidor anymore. You don't have David Slay anymore, but they're still very good. Ahmed Moten's legit. Damon Wilson's legit. Marquise Lightfoot's a good player. Justin Scott's a good player. But you start comparing the second and third levels, and it's advantage Notre Dame. So I'll give you a wash at best because I think their starting lineup is very good. Very good. But I think Notre Dame clearly has the depth. If you're being honest and objective at this, I don't think that's really something that you can argue if you're being honest and objective about it.
Yeah, the depth is the clear separator for the defensive line. When the starting lineup is comparable, you have to go and look at what's behind that. And I just don't think it's a contest when you start looking at the depth, because Notre Dame could put out 2 top 20 caliber defensive lines between, like, in their depths, I'm saying. Like, between the first team and any combination with the second team, or if you just wanted to go full second team on the D line, they have a top 20 defensive line. You could not say the same for Miami, in my opinion. Talking about their depth. So
I agree. And then listen, if you want to have a debate about the rankings, let's have it. It'll be fun. But you're going to miss me when you start talking about Pro Football Focus's player rankings. You're going to really lose me in that conversation. So find a better way to have this discussion, because I think it's a fair discussion, Trevor. We think one team is a top 6 team, and we think the other team is a top 6 team. I believe we had Miami when we did our who has the more talented rosters. I think we had Miami ranked higher than what we have them in our preseason top 25, because we took out experience, coaching, we just looked at pure talent. I think we had Miami 4th, correct? Mm-hmm. I think 4th or 5th. Number 1 is Notre Dame. So, like, when you're talking about the difference between like 1 and 4, you're going to have a lot of, I think this, but I'll give you that. And I think that's true of this debate. I think it's debatable, and you can have that debate, but you're just going to lose me if you start talking about Pro Football Focus rankings. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, you're just going to lose me there. But anyway, Trev, I think overall that's a great question, and it's a legitimate. I don't think either team dominates the other team anywhere. Do you, Trev?
No. I mean, the only one, and we still have to see it play out, is Notre Dame's offensive line is significantly ahead of Miami's offensive line. But then you start getting
experience, I would argue. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah,
that's the only one that I would say. But I mean, outside of that, and even then, there's still stuff we have to see from Notre Dame's offensive line. You could argue the better coach is the one down in Miami.
I wouldn't argue that. I would grant that.
But the better talent across the board right now is Notre Dame's offensive line. And that's one that I could see being like a clear cut, and if CJ makes the jump that we think that he's going to, I don't know. You could debate like just flat raw numbers, but when you start talking about like the performance and who you'd rather have on your team as a quarterback, I don't know if at the end of the season there's going to be much debate between Darian Mensah and CJ Carr, but none of them, it is like a landslide type of on either side. Like with Miami's receivers right now, I give them the edge. I just do, flat out. But at the end of the season, I think it'll be debatable. So outside of offensive line,
but even there, Trev, I don't think the edge is as great as maybe some Notre Dame fans want to make it out to be, because they're making it all about proven production, which is fair, but that's just a position I don't care as much about. But like even offensive line, I agree with what you're saying there. That's a good that one's where right now you could argue is a gap, but their left tackle was also a 5-star.
Yeah.
Samson Okalola was a 5-star. Like, there's talent there too. It's just there's less experience across the board than what Notre Dame has. So, like, about the O-line, I kind of look at that similarly to the point you just made about wide receivers, where I'll give you right now Notre Dame's offensive line is significantly better. Will it be in November? That's a fair question. Just like the gap at receiver may not be as great. So I think it goes both ways. And I think that's why both of these teams are two of the better teams in the country and why they're both legitimate title contenders, which goes back to our second topic of today. When you have two teams that we view as legitimate championship contenders, you're not going to have a bunch of wide gaps in position groups. And honestly, there's some other teams like Texas. I would argue there's more wider gaps between Notre Dame and Texas than there's Notre Dame and Miami. It's just that where Texas is really good, they're really good. And that's kind of where I think you'll see some differences. Like Texas, I think right now stacks up better with Notre Dame on offensive line, for example. Their defensive line is fantastic, and they have better depth than Miami. The gap in secondary, way bigger between Notre Dame and Texas than what Notre Dame and Miami is. And so, like, those are things that you look at for me. So it makes for fun debate. We're actually going to do some segments on this over the summer where we're actually going to take Notre Dame versus the top 10 teams in the country and do like a stacking up discussion. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think you guys are going to really like it. So it'll be a segment that we'll do on certain days during the summer. Notre Dame against so-and-so. And it's going to be a blast. I'm looking forward to it. Very, very much looking forward to it.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, the guys are going live at IB Nation Sports Beat here in about 7 or so minutes. And they're going to be talking a little bit more blue gold game recap. They're going to be talking some good topics on tonight's show. You're going to want to make sure you tune into that. Brian and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. But on your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.